power, at its core, is not merely about control, it is about perception. And few perceptions are more delicate than that of superiority. The first law of power, never outshine the master, is not a suggestion, it is a survival principle woven through centuries of human hierarchy. It speaks to a quiet, often unspoken truth. Those at the top do not merely desire obedience, they require the illusion of supremacy. To challenge that illusion, even unintentionally, is to place yourself in danger. It is not enough to be brilliant, you must also know when to let your brilliance remain unseen. Consider the court of an ancient emperor, where poets, scholars, and musicians gathered not only to entertain but to survive. Among them, a lute player performs a piece so transcendent that the room stills. The emperor, usually the center of all attention, is no longer the most radiant presence. For a moment, the music eclipses the throne. The next morning, the musician is dismissed, perhaps sent to a distant province, or never heard from again. Not because of treason, not because of error, but because brilliance, when unchecked, becomes a threat. The master cannot bear to be upstaged, not by talent, not by intellect, not even by grace. What matters is not truth, but optics. The sun must never be outshone by a star, no matter how bright. This law echoes through history like a whisper beneath the noise of conquests and revolutions. Archimedes, absorbed in geometric sketches, ignored a Roman soldier and was slain, not for defiance, but for failing to acknowledge the power in the room. Thomas More, brilliant and principled, was executed not solely for his beliefs, but for daring to stand morally taller than the king. Even in modern offices, the overqualified employee who corrects their superior in meetings often finds themselves sidelined, reassigned, or quietly pushed out. Excellence, when it casts a shadow on authority, is rarely celebrated. It is contained. The deeper implication is unsettling. True ability is often punished, not rewarded. To rise, one must not only be capable, but strategically invisible. You must let the master feel like the source of light, even as you burn beside them. This creates a silent compromise with authenticity. We learn to pause before answering, to soften our ideas, to credit others for our insights. In doing so, we survive, but at what cost? Are we preserving ourselves, or erasing ourselves? And this is not confined to palaces or boardrooms. It lives in families where a gifted child makes a parent feel obsolete. In friendships where charisma becomes rivalry. To outshine is to disrupt the natural order of perceived power. And disruption, however noble, is often met not with praise, but with removal. So we begin here, in this quiet act of dimming. Not because we are less, but because power demands illusion. And if trust is fragile, what of loyalty? Trust is a quiet force, often mistaken for permanence. We place it in those closest to us, friends who have shared our laughter, weathered our storms, spoken words of unwavering loyalty. Yet history, both personal and political, reveals a haunting truth. The deepest cuts rarely come from open adversaries, but from hands we once held in confidence. The friend who shares your secrets with others, the ally who shifts allegiance when the wind changes, the confidant who benefits from your downfall, these are the architects of silent betrayal. And so, the second law emerges not as cynicism, but as a sober recalibration of human nature. Never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies. Friendship, by its very nature, breeds comfort. And comfort breeds carelessness. When someone believes they are indispensable to your life, they begin to take their position for granted. They may slacken in their loyalty, assume your forgiveness, or even exploit your goodwill, not out of malice, but because they feel safe in your affection. Love, in its warmth, can blind us to ambition, envy, or fear that simmers beneath the surface of even the closest bonds. A friend may betray you not because they hate you, but because they fear being left behind, or because opportunity whispers louder than loyalty. Enemies, on the other hand, operate in the open air of opposition. They do not pretend. Their motives are often clear, their actions predictable. Because they are watched, distrusted, and marginalized, they must be competent to survive. They cannot afford complacency. And this is where their value lies, not in their goodwill, but in their necessity. An enemy, aware of their precarious position, will work harder, think sharper, and remain vigilant. The shrewd ruler who appoints a rival to a high post does not do so out of forgiveness, but strategy. He knows the man will prove himself relentlessly, precisely because he is not trusted. And in that effort, he becomes useful. There is a strange honesty in enmity. Where friends may flatter to preserve harmony, enemies speak truths they have no reason to sugarcoat. They see your weaknesses not to protect you, but to exploit them, yet in doing so, they reveal what others dare not name. To use an enemy is not to embrace them, but to harness their focus, their hunger, their clarity. This law does not command us to abandon love or dissolve all friendships. Rather, it asks us to see relationships with open eyes. Loyalty is not a guarantee, it is a choice people make moment by moment. And sometimes, the person who opposes you sees you more clearly than the one who claims to love you. In a world where allegiance is fluid, perhaps the truest wisdom is not whom to trust, but how to navigate the spaces between trust and caution. And if words between friends can deceive, what of our own words? What happens when we speak our deepest intentions aloud? Let us now step into the hush of secrecy. There is a quiet power in the unknown, a kind of gravity that draws attention, stirs curiosity, and commands caution. When your intentions are clear, you become predictable. And predictability, in the intricate dance of human interaction, is vulnerability. The moment someone knows what you want, whether it's a promotion, a person's affection, or the upper hand in a negotiation, they no longer see you. They see your desire. And from that point forward, they are no longer reacting to who you are, but to what you lack. This is the essence of the third law: conceal your intentions. Not as deception for its own sake, but as preservation of autonomy, of momentum, of control. Imagine a diplomat seated across from their counterpart, calm, eyes steady, voice measured. They do not declare their objectives. They ask questions. They listen. They let silence linger. In that stillness, the other begins to speak, too much, too soon, revealing their fears, their priorities, their weaknesses. The diplomat gains ground not through argument, but through absence. Absence of agenda. Absence of urgency. Absence of need. By concealing their endgame, they remain untouchable, a shadow moving just beyond the light. Desire is a kind of exposure. When you announce what you seek, you invite interference. Others will obstruct, bargain, or exploit your longing. A colleague who knows you crave recognition may take credit for your ideas. A lover aware of your devotion may withhold affection to maintain control. Even well-meaning people, sensing your need, may unconsciously manipulate the timing, the conditions, the emotional weight of what you seek. But when your intentions remain veiled, you deny them that leverage. You become a riddle they cannot solve, a current they cannot navigate. Yet the deeper implication unsettles the soul. If we all conceal, if every smile hides a calculation and every silence guards a secret, what becomes of authenticity? Can true connection exist when no one reveals their heart? We yearn for honesty, for intimacy, for the relief of being fully seen, yet this law suggests that to be seen too clearly is to be controlled. The most powerful people are often the most inscrutable, monarchs who never smile, leaders who speak in proverbs, lovers who never confess too soon. Their power lies not in what they do, but in what they leave unsaid. And so we arrive at a paradox. To be safe, we must be opaque. But to be loved, we must be transparent. The mind gravitates toward mystery, the heart aches for revelation. In a world where truth is a currency, silence becomes the ultimate reserve. And if intentions are dangerous when exposed, then the words we choose, or refuse to speak, carry even greater weight. Let us now descend into the hush that follows confession, into the vast and trembling space of what is left unspoken. Let us enter the realm of silence. There is a quiet erosion that happens with every unnecessary word, a slow leaking of power, composure, and control. The fourth law, always say less than necessary, is not merely about brevity, it is about the sacred economy of speech. In a world intoxicated by noise, where voices compete in endless cycles of declaration, opinion, and performance, the one who speaks little does not fade into the background. They rise above it. Like a single candle in a storm, their presence is defined not by volume, but by stillness. The fewer words you offer, the more each one weighs. The less you explain, the more others lean in to interpret, to wonder, to project their own meanings onto your silence. Consider the person who enters a room and says almost nothing. They listen deeply, intently. Their eyes do not dart, their posture does not shift. When they finally speak, the room quiets. Not because they shouted, but because their words have been earned by the weight of restraint. Contrast this with the one who fills every pause, who feels compelled to justify, clarify, or impress. Their voice, though loud, carries less authority. In their effort to be understood, they reveal too much, not just of their thoughts, but of their insecurities, their fears of being overlooked, their hunger for approval. The more they talk, the more they unravel themselves, thread by thread, until nothing is left to mystery. Silence is not emptiness. It is a space charged with possibility. When you refuse to speak, you force others to do the work, to guess your intentions, to reveal their own anxieties in the attempt to fill the quiet. A well-placed pause can unnerve a liar, unsettle a negotiator, or make a confessor whisper truths they hadn't planned to share. In silence, power accumulates like pressure beneath the surface of water. And when you finally speak, it is not to answer, but to redirect, to place a single stone that sends ripples through the entire conversation. But this law carries a quiet sorrow. For silence, while powerful, is also lonely. Can love thrive in withheld words? Can friendship deepen when one always holds back? There is a tension between influence and intimacy, between the need to be powerful and the need to be known. The stoic leader, the enigmatic lover, the unreadable mentor, they may command respect, but do they ever truly connect? Or do they become monuments, admired from a distance, never touched? And yet, in a culture drowning in confession, in oversharing, in the relentless broadcast of self, silence becomes an act of resistance. To say less is to reclaim agency. To speak only when it matters is to transform language from noise into signal. The wise do not fear silence. They inhabit it. They know that what is left unsaid often echoes the longest. And when the last word fades, another force remains, something that outlives tone, argument, even memory. It is not what you said. It is what you became. Let us now consider its weight. Your name. Your image. Your reputation. There is a fragile boundary between who you are and who the world believes you to be, and across that boundary, fate is often decided. The fifth law, so much depends on reputation, guard it with your life, speaks not to truth, but to the stories people tell about you when you are not in the room. For in the theater of human affairs, reality is often secondary to perception. What you've done matters far less than what is believed you've done. A lifetime of quiet integrity can be undone by a single whispered accusation. A moment of exhaustion, misinterpreted as cruelty. A private doubt, mistaken for betrayal. And just like that, the image you've built begins to fracture. Reputation is not merely opinion, it is a force. It opens doors before you knock. It silences critics before they speak. It allows the mere suggestion of your presence to alter the course of events. A general with an unbroken reputation can win a battle without drawing a sword, for the enemy surrenders to the myth before the fight begins. A CEO known for ruthlessness may command obedience not through surveillance, but through the mere possibility of disapproval. This is the armor of reputation, invisible, intangible, yet stronger than steel. But it is also fragile. Like glass polished over years, it can shatter in an instant. And unlike material wealth, it cannot be quickly restored. Apologies are forgotten. Explanations sound like excuses. The mind clings to the first impression, especially when it carries emotion, fear, scandal, outrage. Once you are seen as weak, untrustworthy, or fallen, people will interpret every future action through that lens, twisting even virtue into proof of guilt. And so, the wise do not leave their reputation to chance. They shape it deliberately, through selective visibility, calculated silence, symbolic acts. They allow mystery to accumulate around them. They let others speak on their behalf, turning allies into defenders of their image. They understand that a single powerful moment, a bold decision, a quiet act of strength, can echo for years, becoming legend. Yet beneath this cultivated exterior, a quiet question lingers. Who are you when no one is watching? If the self is buried beneath the persona, does it atrophy? Are we not all, in some way, trapped between the need to be respected and the desire to be real? To guard your reputation with your life is to protect your influence, but it may also mean sacrificing the freedom to be flawed, to change, to be human. In the end, reputation is not about truth. It is about survival. And if it must be maintained, how do you ensure the world sees you at all? Sometimes, silence is no longer enough. Sometimes, you must force the world to see you. To be unseen is to be powerless. Not because you lack ability, wisdom, or vision, but because influence requires witness. The sixth law, court attention at all costs, is a stark reminder that in the theater of human dynamics, silence and modesty are not virtues, they are obscurity. And obscurity is the slow death of relevance. It does not matter how skilled you are if no one knows your name. It does not matter how profound your ideas are if they dissolve into the air, unheard. Power flows to those who occupy space in the collective mind, who imprint themselves upon memory. And to do that, you must be seen, not just once, but repeatedly, unmistakably, inescapably. Attention is not something to be passively received. It must be seized, provoked, orchestrated. You can shine through brilliance, yes, through mastery that stops conversation when you speak. But you can also command it through spectacle, a bold gesture, a controversial statement, an act so unexpected it lingers and whispers for weeks. The silent advisor may know the truth, but it is the jester who makes the king laugh in front of the court, the one whose name is remembered, whose presence is anticipated. Humor, drama, mystery, even scandal, these are not distractions from power. They are its instruments. History does not remember the cautious. It remembers those who stepped into the light, who refused to be overlooked. The artist who burned their own work in public. the leader who delivered a speech in silence, standing motionless before a crowd. The scientist who announced a discovery with a riddle. These are not acts of vanity, but strategy. Each moment is a hook in the mind of the world, pulling it toward you. Without attention, ideas vanish. Without spectacle, truth goes unnoticed. But there is a cost to being watched. The spotlight does not only illuminate, it exposes. The more people see you, the more they scrutinize, envy, and resent. You become a target. Your flaws are magnified. Your silence is interpreted as guilt. Your rest is seen as weakness. And worse, you begin to depend on the gaze of others. The performance, once a tool, becomes a cage. You must keep inventing, shocking, dazzling, because to stop is to fade. And when the applause ceases, when the eyes turn away, who are you then? There are those who rise in a blaze of attention, only to collapse when the fire burns out, not because they lack substance, but because they mistook visibility for permanence. The self that exists only in reflection is fragile, always one moment away from oblivion. And yet, without attention, there is no stage. Without an audience, no legacy. So the dance continues, between presence and authenticity, between being seen and being real. But must you always be the one to act? To speak? To shine? What if you could move through the world without lifting a finger, while others do the labor, and you reap the reward? Let us now consider the quiet art of delegation, and the deeper game of deception. Power does not reside in effort. It resides in recognition. The seventh law, get others to do the work for you, but always take the credit, is not a confession of laziness, it is a revelation of how influence truly operates. In every great achievement, there is a hidden architecture of labor, often built by unseen hands. The novel is written by the author, but shaped by the editor, the researcher, the assistant who fact-checked every line. The empire is conquered by soldiers, endured by supply carriers, dreamed of by strategists whose names history forgets. Yet it is the leader who stands at the podium, the face on the coin, the voice in the speech. The one who did not dig the trench, design the machine, or bleed on the battlefield, but who claimed the moment. This is not an accident. It is design. The powerful understand that labor is necessary, but visibility is sovereign. They do not reject work, they redirect it. They position themselves at the center of the narrative, not through brute effort, but through presence, timing, and symbolism. They are the conductor, not the musician. The director, not the crew. They ensure that when the curtain rises, their silhouette is the one cast in the spotlight. And in doing so, they transform effort into legacy, not for those who toiled, but for themselves. Consider the CEO who announces a breakthrough product, smiling beside prototypes developed by engineers who worked nights and weekends. No one asks their names. The world sees only the face on the cover of the magazine. The politician who champions a policy crafted by anonymous analysts. The artist who takes sole credit for a collaborative vision. These are not isolated betrayals, they are systemic patterns, repeated across centuries and cultures. The one who speaks last often owns the story. The one who stands at the finish line is remembered as the runner. And yet, this law forces a quiet reckoning. If meritocracy were real, the quiet builder would be celebrated as much as the one who unveiled the building. But we do not reward labor, we reward ownership. We do not honor the process, we honor the symbol. Success is not measured in sweat, but in perception. And perception is controlled not by those who do, but by those who appear. But what happens to the soul of the one who labors in silence? What happens to a world where contribution is invisible, and credit is seized? Trust erodes. Loyalty fades. Quietly, the gears of progress begin to grind slower, not from lack of will, but from lack of recognition. And still, the strategy remains effective. Because power is not about fairness. It is about narrative. To let others do the work is not weakness, it is focus. To claim the result is not theft, it is positioning. In the end, history does not record who built the bridge. It records who opened it. But to claim credit, you must be seen. Better still, you must never have to chase attention. You must make others come to you, drawn by your gravity, your mystery, your unreachability. Let us now drift toward the quiet power of waiting, where the one who stays still holds the advantage. There is a kind of power in stillness, an almost gravitational pull that draws others forward while you remain unmoving. The eighth law, make other people come to you, use bait if necessary, turns conventional ambition on its head. It does not celebrate the striver, the networker, the one who knocks on every door. Instead, it honors the one who waits, who creates the conditions for pursuit, who becomes the destination rather than the seeker. In motion, you expose yourself. In stillness, you observe. And in observation, you gain the upper hand. When someone comes to you, they are already in motion. Their energy is spent before the conversation begins. Their urgency reveals their need. They speak too soon, reveal too much, betray their desperation in the way they sit, the tone of their voice, the offers they make too quickly. You, by contrast, remain centered, calm, in control of time and space. You do not chase, therefore, you do not beg. You do not scramble, therefore, you do not falter. You are the still point in the turning world, and from that position, you see everything. The art lies not in refusal, but in invitation, subtle, irresistible. You do not announce availability. You imply scarcity. You do not answer immediately. You let silence build curiosity. You speak in riddles, offer glimpses of insight, dangle the promise of access, wisdom, or opportunity, just enough to spark desire, but never enough to satisfy. Like a flame in the dark, you draw moths not by shouting, but by glowing. The bait may be mystery, exclusivity, or the mere suggestion that you possess something others lack. And once they begin to move toward you, the game has already tilted in your favor. History is filled with those who mastered this quiet pull. The oracle at Delphi did not travel to kings. Kings traveled to her, through deserts and wars, just to hear a single cryptic sentence. The reclusive artist whose silence makes the world beg for a new painting. The advisor who speaks only when summoned, making each word feel like a revelation. They do not seek power. They become a destination for it. But this law carries a quiet danger. For stillness, when prolonged, can harden into isolation. Waiting too long can become passivity. The spider who never leaves the web may grow fat on flies, but what happens when the rain comes and the web collapses? What if the world moves on, and no one comes knocking? There is a fine line between strategic patience and irrelevance. And worse, what if, in becoming the hunter, you forget how to connect? The one who is always pursued may never know what it means to reach out, to be vulnerable, to love without calculation. Still, in the realm of influence, motion is risk. Initiative is exposure. And the one who waits, watching, listening, feeling the faintest tremors of intention, holds the deeper knowledge. They know not just what was said, but why it was said. Not just what was offered, but what was feared. Now, with others drawn near, how do you claim victory? Not through debate. Not through force. But through something far more silent. Let us consider the quiet triumph of action over argument. There is a quiet finality in action that words can never match. Arguments twist and spiral, feeding on themselves, going nowhere. Two people can debate truth for hours and end exactly where they began, frustrated, entrenched, unchanged. But a single act, a resignation, a transfer of funds, a door left open or firmly closed, alters the landscape. It does not ask for belief. It imposes a new reality. This is the essence of the ninth law: win through your actions, never through argument. Not because words are meaningless, but because they are weightless in the face of what is. Consider the employee passed over for promotion. They could protest, list their achievements, appeal to fairness, yet the decision remains. But if they quietly accept a higher offer elsewhere, their departure echoes louder than any speech. The company suddenly sees their value, not because they were told, but because they felt the loss. Or the lover who pleads their devotion, promising change, begging for another chance. Words pour forth like rain. But if they never show up, never call, never act, those words dissolve into air. Conversely, the one who says nothing but appears at the doorstep with quiet consistency, who repairs what was broken without fanfare, who stays when staying is hard, this person does not argue for love. They embody it. Power, in its purest form, is not persuasive. It is declarative. It does not explain. It simply does. The general does not debate strategy with the enemy. They move troops. The artist does not defend their vision in court. They release the work. The leader who rebuilds a city does not boast of their compassion. They let the streets speak for them. Results bypass the mind and strike directly at perception. And once reality shifts, no argument can restore the old order. But this law carries a silence that unsettles. It dismisses dialogue, negotiation, the slow work of understanding. It suggests that truth is not found in conversation, but in consequence. And in doing so, it risks justifying force over fairness. For injustice, too, can be imposed through action. Oppression does not argue. It arrives. A law is passed. A border is closed. A voice is erased. No debate. Just execution. So we must ask, if actions alone define victory, what becomes of those who cannot act? The silenced, the powerless, the ones denied the means to demonstrate? Is justice merely the privilege of those strong enough to impose their version of reality? And yet, even resistance often wins not through speeches, but through strikes, marches, the quiet refusal to comply. Rosa Parks did not argue on the bus. She sat. And in that single act, an empire of segregation trembled. Perhaps the deepest truth is this: words prepare the ground. But only action plants the seed. Still, not every action leads to power. Some lead to ruin. Especially when the wrong hands are touched. For there are those whose presence drains you, whose sorrow, bitterness, or misfortune seeps into your spirit like cold. Let us now turn toward the unseen contagion. The poison carried not in blades, but in souls. There is a quiet transmission that occurs between people, not of words, but of atmosphere. A presence walks into a room and the temperature drops. Shoulders tense. Smiles falter. Conversation dims. No one speaks of despair, yet everyone feels it. This is the unseen force the 10th law warns against: infection. Avoid the unhappy or the unlucky. It is not merely about avoiding bad moods or fleeting sadness. It is about recognizing that certain emotional states, deep pessimism, chronic victimhood, relentless misfortune, carry a kind of gravity, pulling those around them into their orbit. Like a virus, they spread not through touch, but through proximity, through repeated exposure, through the slow erosion of hope. Energy is finite. So is focus. When you surround yourself with those who see the world as broken, who expect betrayal, who believe effort is futile, their lens begins to shape your own. You start to hesitate, to doubt opportunities, to interpret neutral events as signs of impending failure. The mind, like water, seeks the lowest level. And if all it hears is that the world is against you, it will begin to listen. Even the strongest resolve can be worn down by the constant drip of despair. This law does not suggest abandoning the grieving, the ill, or those in temporary pain. Grief has its season. Compassion has its place. But there is a difference between someone enduring hardship and someone who wears suffering as identity. The one who refuses help. The one who sabotages every opening. The one who turns every conversation toward their misfortunes, not to heal, but to confirm their narrative. These are the carriers of emotional infection, not out of malice, but out of fixation. And their influence is not always loud. It is subtle. A sigh at the mention of success. A smirk at ambition. A quiet phrase, asterisk you'll see, it never works out. Asterisk. The powerful understand that mindset is their most valuable asset. And they guard it fiercely. They know that to rise, one must cultivate an inner climate of possibility. This requires selective company. Not because they are heartless, but because they are strategic. A plant cannot grow in poison soil, no matter how strong its roots. And yet, this law unsettles the conscience. To distance oneself from the struggling feels like betrayal. Is survival worth the cost of compassion? Does power demand emotional detachment? And if we abandon those who fall, do we not risk becoming indifferent, cold, efficient, and alone? Perhaps the deeper question is not whether to help, but how. Compassion need not mean immersion. You can care without absorbing. Support without enabling. Be present without becoming a vessel for another's despair. But to allow the infection to spread, to let the weight of others' hopelessness settle into your bones, is not nobility. It is surrender. And in the game of influence, a weakened spirit is the first defeat. So the wise do not reject the suffering. They protect their flame. For if they lose their light, they cannot guide anyone. Now, having guarded the self, what if the next move is not withdrawal, but entanglement of a different kind? Not through shared sorrow, but through necessity. Let us consider the opposite path. Not avoidance, but dependency. Make them need you. There is a quiet form of power that does not announce itself with force or spectacle, but with presence, so constant, so reliable, that its absence becomes unthinkable. The 11th law, learn to keep people dependent on you, speaks to the subtle art of becoming essential. Not through domination, but through service so precise, so deeply woven into the fabric of another's life, that to remove yourself would unravel their world. This is not about manipulation in the crude sense, but about positioning, becoming the unseen thread that holds the tapestry together. The one who knows the password, who remembers the unwritten rules, who calms the boss before meetings, who always has the right contact, the forgotten file, the solution whispered at the last moment. You do not demand loyalty. You make it inevitable. Dependence is not always born of weakness. It is often born of efficiency. People gravitate toward those who reduce friction, who absorb complexity, who make life easier. And over time, they stop asking how things work, because you are the answer. They stop seeking alternatives, because you are always there. Like oxygen, your value is invisible in abundance, but catastrophic in absence. When you are gone, even briefly, chaos erupts. Deadlines collapse. Confusion spreads. And in that moment of crisis, your worth is finally seen, not as a person, but as a function. This law thrives in offices, relationships, families. The assistant who manages not just schedules but emotions. The partner who handles all the logistics, from bills to birthdays, until the other forgets how to function. The friend who mediates every conflict, whose absence turns gatherings into arguments. In each case, influence is not claimed, it is absorbed through necessity. And because the dependence is mutual, or masked as love, it feels natural. Even noble. But beneath this quiet control lies a haunting question. Are you valued for who you are, or for what you do? When kindness becomes expected, it ceases to be a gift. When help becomes obligation, it turns into a chain. The more indispensable you make yourself, the harder it becomes to step away. To change. To be seen beyond your utility. And if one day the dependency is broken, if they learn to live without you, or replace you with someone else, what remains of your identity? Worse still, dependence distorts connection. Love, when rooted in need, is not freedom, it is transaction. The one who stays not because they choose you, but because they cannot survive without you, is not a partner. They are a prisoner. And you, the keeper of the key, may find yourself trapped as well. And yet, this law endures because it works. Power does not always roar. Sometimes, it hums in the background, in the quiet confidence that no one can move forward without your silent approval. But there is a more insidious way to deepen loyalty, to disarm suspicion, to make the powerful lower their guard. Not through service, but through the rarest of offerings, honesty. A single, well-placed truth, delivered at the perfect moment, can shatter defenses. Let us now consider the weapon hidden in sincerity. The strategic revelation. Used not to confess, but to conquer, fess, but to conquer. Honesty is often revered as the highest virtue, the foundation of trust, the light in a world of deception. But like any force, it can be wielded, not to reveal, but to conceal. The 12th law, use selective honesty and generosity to disarm your victim, unveils a chilling truth. Sincerity, when deployed with precision, becomes one of the most effective weapons of manipulation. It is not the lie that deceives most deeply, but the truth told at just the right moment, the single beam of light in a dark room that makes the observer believe the entire space is illuminated. A single confession, a small act of unexpected generosity, can dismantle suspicion in an instant, not because it proves integrity, but because it creates the illusion of it. Imagine someone who admits to a minor fault, perhaps confessing they once took credit for a colleague's idea, or revealing a personal insecurity. The admission feels brave, vulnerable. It earns trust. And from that moment forward, their words carry more weight. People assume that because they were honest about one thing, they must be honest about all. But what if that confession was carefully chosen? What if it was the one harmless truth that shields a dozen dangerous ones? The mind, craving coherence, fills in the gaps. If they told me this, they must have nothing to hide, and just like that, the guard drops. Generosity works the same way. A sudden gift, an unsolicited favor, a moment of unexpected kindness, it disarms. The recipient feels gratitude, obligation, even affection. They are less likely to question motives, to suspect ulterior designs. And when the real move comes, weeks or months later, they are already disarmed, their judgment clouded by the memory of that earlier warmth. The poison is not in the gift, but in the timing. The sincerity is not false in itself, but its isolation makes it deceptive. Like a single star in a painted sky, it suggests a universe of truth where there is only void. This law operates in politics, in relationships, in business. The leader who admits a past mistake in a speech, while omitting the far greater ones, becomes relatable, human, trustworthy. The lover who gives a meaningful gift after a period of distance makes reconciliation feel inevitable, even if their intentions remain unchanged. The negotiator who offers a small concession early on makes the other side believe they are dealing in good faith, while quietly securing far greater gains. And this is what makes the law so insidious. It does not reject virtue. It exploits it. It uses honesty not to connect, but to conquer. Kindness becomes a tactic. Vulnerability, a trap. The deeper horror is this: if sincerity can be weaponized, then no act of goodness can ever be fully trusted. Every apology, every gift, every moment of openness must be questioned. Not because people are inherently deceitful, but because the strategy works. And when virtue becomes a tool of manipulation, the world grows colder, more guarded, more isolated. We begin to wonder, is anyone ever truly kind? Or are we all just choosing which truths to reveal, and which debts to collect later? And if the most convincing lies are built on real honesty, then the most dangerous deceptions are the ones that feel like love. Now, when you do need something, when you must ask for help, do not rely on such fragile emotions. Do not appeal to mercy. Do not beg for compassion. Instead, speak to something far more reliable. To self-interest. There is a quiet illusion we carry, that people help because they care. That kindness flows from compassion, that loyalty rises from gratitude, that generosity is its own reward. But the 13th law, when asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest, never their mercy or gratitude, gently dismantles this belief, not with cruelty, but with clarity. It does not deny that love exists, or that people can be kind. It simply observes that even the noblest actions are often rooted in some form of personal gain, whether it's the warmth of feeling needed, the pride of being seen as generous, or the quiet calculation that helping you today may serve them tomorrow. The most effective way to move someone is not to appeal to their conscience, but to align your need with their desire. Imagine two requests. 1. I'm struggling. You've always been good to me. Please help me, out of kindness. The other. I'm working on a project that could open doors for both of us. Your insight would make it exceptional, and your name would be front and center when it succeeds. Which is more likely to inspire action. The first appeals to emotion, to obligation, to guilt. The second offers value. It transforms the helper into a partner, not a charity case. It speaks not to their heart, but to their ambition. And in doing so, it removes the weight of sacrifice. Helping you no longer feels like giving something away, it feels like gaining something. This is not manipulation. It is alignment. The universe runs on exchange, energy for energy, effort for reward, time for return. Even in love, we give because it fulfills us. Even in charity, donors receive recognition, status, or inner peace. The wise do not resent this truth, they use it. They frame every request as a proposition, not a plea. They make others feel not like rescuers, but like strategists, beneficiaries, co-creators. A leader does not say, we need you to stay late out of duty. They say, this is your chance to shape the future of the team, and be recognized for it. The difference is not in the action, but in the reason. And reason, not emotion, is what moves people consistently. Yet this law unsettles. It strips away the romance of selflessness. It suggests that every favor has a price, even if it's paid in ego. Is this cynicism? Or is it simply seeing human nature as it is, not as we wish it to be? If all kindness is transactional, then even love must be questioned. Do we love for the other, or for how they make us feel? Do we help because we care, or because we need to be seen as someone who cares? Perhaps the truth lies not in rejecting self-interest, but in embracing it honestly. When we admit that people act for their own reasons, we stop begging and start designing. We stop feeling shame for needing help and start crafting offers that make helping want to say yes. And in that shift, power returns. But what if the deepest help does not come from friends, but from those who appear to oppose us? What if the closest ally is the one who pretends to be a companion, while gathering intelligence for the enemy? Let us now turn toward the quiet betrayal hidden in laughter. The friend who listens too well. The spy who never draws a blade. Intimacy is the ultimate access. Not force, not threats, not surveillance, but the quiet privilege of being let in. The 14th law, pose as a friend, work as a spy, does not speak of trench coats and hidden microphones. It speaks of smiles held a moment too long, of shared confessions that feel mutual but are not, of the slow, silent gathering of knowledge behind the mask of affection. The most dangerous intruder is not the one at the gate, but the one already inside, seated at the table, laughing at the jokes, remembering your birthday, asking how your mother is. They are not suspected because they fit too perfectly into the role of friend. And in that trust, they are granted the one thing power can never seize by force, access to the unguarded self. To spy through intimacy is to study someone not from the outside, but from within their rhythm. You learn when they are vulnerable, after a drink, in the hush before sleep, during moments of unexpected failure. You hear the fears they whisper not to manipulate, but because they believe they are safe. You notice the patterns, the way they hesitate before making decisions, the names they mention with tension, the topics they avoid. And because you appear to share in their world, revealing small, calculated truths of your own, you are seen not as a threat, but as a confidant. Your questions feel like care. Your silence, like empathy. In truth, every word they offer is cataloged, every gesture analyzed, every weakness filed away for future use. This is not the work of villains alone. It happens in boardrooms, where an executive befriends a rival only to anticipate their moves. In relationships, where one partner gathers emotional leverage for a future separation. In politics, where allies exchange secrets over dinner, not out of loyalty, but preparation. The most effective spies do not break in, they are invited. They do not demand information, they are given it freely, wrapped in the language of love, loyalty, or camaraderie. And this is what makes the loss so deeply unsettling. It does not corrupt friendship from the outside. It weaponizes its very essence. Trust, openness, vulnerability, these are not just virtues. They are vulnerabilities. The heart that opens is also exposed. And if we can all, at some point, be both friend and instrument, then no closeness is immune to exploitation. We are left with a haunting question. Can true connection exist when the possibility of deception lives in every shared secret? Do we protect ourselves by withdrawing completely? Or do we risk betrayal simply to know what it means to be known? Perhaps the tragedy is not that some friendships are lies, but that the structure of power makes honesty a liability. The more we reveal, the more we are known, and the more we can be used. And so, the cycle continues. We pretend to be close, so we can see clearly. We pretend to care, so we can strike precisely. But when the moment comes to act, when the intelligence is gathered, the weakness identified, the time right, hesitation is fatal. power does not reward the cautious. It rewards the decisive. And sometimes, to survive, you must not wound your enemy. You must erase them. Let us now turn toward the finality of total victory. Crush completely. There is a myth of nobility in sparing your enemy, a belief that mercy elevates the victor, that restraint proves moral superiority. But the 15th law, crush your enemy totally, dismantles that ideal with cold, unflinching logic. A defeated foe left breathing is not a testament to your virtue, but a seed for future war. Wounded, humiliated, stripped of power but not destroyed, they do not forget. They wait. They rebuild. They whisper in shadows, gathering allies, stoking resentment, until the moment comes to strike back, often when you least expect it. History does not remember the generous conqueror. It remembers the one who ended the threat. And so, if you must fight, do not merely win. Erase the possibility of return. This is not about cruelty for its own sake. It is about finality. The half measure, exile instead of execution, demotion instead of removal, apology instead of annihilation, creates a narrative. The fallen enemy becomes a martyr. Their suffering is retold as injustice. Their name gains sympathy. And sympathy, in time, breeds revival. The deposed king, banished to a distant land, becomes a symbol of resistance. The fired executive, publicly shamed, becomes a rallying figure for dissent. Power abhors lingering shadows. To leave an enemy alive in influence, reputation, or memory is to plant a time bomb beneath your own throne. To crush totally is to dismantle not just the person, but their ecosystem. Remove their allies. Undermine their legacy. Replace their symbols with your own. Let no remnant of their power remain, no loyalists unchallenged, no ideology unchallenged, no hope unbroken. When others witness the totality of the defeat, they do not rise. They hesitate. They submit. The message is not just that you won, but that opposition ends in oblivion. Fear, in this sense, is not a byproduct, it is the design. And yet, this law carries a weight that settles into the soul. To destroy completely is to cross a threshold. The act of total annihilation does not just change the enemy, it changes you. The hands that erase a rival do not remain clean, even if they never struck the final blow. Systems are dismantled. Families are displaced. Voices are silenced. And in the silence that follows, the victor stands alone, surrounded by loyalty born not of admiration, but of terror. Is this tyranny? Yes. But is it also survival? Often. In the world of power, mercy is a luxury, one that the vulnerable cannot afford. The lion does not debate the antelope's right to live. The storm does not warn the tree before it uproots it. To hesitate is to invite reversal. And in the ruthless economy of dominance, the only safe enemy is one who can never rise again. But there is another way to destroy, not through violence, but through absence. Not by crushing, but by withdrawing. To vanish, and let your absence echo louder than any blow. Let us now consider the power of silence, of retreat, of becoming untouchable not by force, but by disappearance. There is a quiet alchemy in disappearance, an almost mystical transformation that occurs when someone steps out of sight. The 16th law, use absence to increase strength and honor, reveals a paradox woven deep into human psychology. Presence, when constant, becomes invisible. The familiar face, the predictable voice, the ever-available hand, these fade into the background, taken for granted like furniture in a room. But remove that presence, even briefly, and something shifts. the mind begins to fill the void with memory, with longing, with speculation. The person who was once merely there becomes mist. And in that absence, they grow larger than they ever were in person. Absence is not passive. It is a deliberate withdrawal, a calculated silence. It is the artist who vanishes after a groundbreaking exhibition, leaving the world wondering if they will return. The leader who retreats from public life, only to re-emerge with a speech that feels like prophecy. The lover who pulls away, not to punish, but to let desire ferment in the quiet. When you are no longer available, you are no longer ordinary. You become a question, a rumor, a symbol. People begin to speak of you in hushed tones, to reinterpret your past words as wisdom, to imagine your return as a kind of reckoning. Your value does not diminish with distance, it multiplies. This law thrives on the human tendency to idealize what we cannot possess. The colleague who takes a sabbatical is suddenly remembered as brilliant, indispensable, visionary, despite having been overlooked for months before they left. The writer who stops publishing is mourned as a lost genius, their earlier work reevaluated with reverence. Even in personal relationships, the one who withdraws often regains power not by pleading, but by vanishing. Because when someone is gone, the mind does not dwell on their flaws. It remembers only the light they cast. But this raises a haunting question: if we only matter when we're absent, does our presence mean anything at all? Is value not in being, but in being missed? And if so, are we not reduced to ghosts, more powerful in our silence than in our speech, more influential in our retreat than in our action? Worse still, absence can be a form of manipulation. To leave not to heal, but to control. To make others ache for your return so they will bend more easily when you do. This is not love. It is leverage. And the deeper you rely on absence to maintain power, the harder it becomes to simply be, to exist in the open, without performance, without strategy, without the need to be missed. And yet, the law endures because it works. The world does not reward constancy. It rewards rarity. A flower that blooms once a year is sacred. One that blooms every day is common. So the wise do not fear disappearance. They embrace it. They know that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all. To step back. To let the silence grow. To let the myth take shape in the dark. And when you return, calm, composed, unexplained, you are not the same. You are not just seen. You are awaited. Now, if absence can elevate, what happens when you return not with clarity, but with chaos? When you refuse to be understood? Let us now stir the waters of fear. Of unpredictability. Fear is not always loud. It does not always arrive with shouts or violence. Often, it slips in quietly, carried on uncertainty, the kind that settles in the gut when you can no longer predict what comes next. The 17th law, keep others in suspended terror, cultivate an air of unpredictability, speaks to this silent domination. It is not the constant punishment that controls, but the possibility of it. Not the ever-present anger, but the smile that might vanish at any moment. When people cannot anticipate your reactions, when kindness and wrath appear without pattern, they stop relying on logic and begin living in caution. They watch your face like a storm watcher scans the sky. Every word is weighed. Every gesture analyzed. And in that state of perpetual tension, obedience becomes reflex, not choice. To be unpredictable is to dismantle the mind's greatest tool, expectation. Humans survive by predicting cause and effect. If I do this, he will respond like that. But when that chain is broken, when praise comes after failure, when punishment follows success, When silence falls where laughter was expected, the mind falters. It cannot adapt. It defaults to fear. And fear is the most efficient form of control. You do not need to punish everyone. You need only punish randomly, so that everyone feels at risk. The servant who is sometimes rewarded for speaking up, sometimes dismissed, will eventually stop speaking at all. The employee who never knows if their boss will applaud or explode will learn to move quietly, to disappear into compliance. This is the psychology of the tyrant, the cult leader, the emotionally volatile partner, those who maintain power not through consistency, but through chaos. Their unpredictability becomes a cage. Loyalty is not earned, it is extracted through anxiety. People stay not because they believe in you, but because they cannot afford to leave. They obey not out of respect, but because the cost of miscalculation is too high. But this law carries a slow poison. For while unpredictability commands fear, it destroys trust. And without trust, there can be no true alliance. No one will stand with you in crisis, not because they are disloyal, but because they have learned that loyalty offers no protection. In your presence, even allies feel like targets. Over time, the room empties. The eyes that once watched you for cues now avoid yours entirely. The silence is no longer respectful, it is terrified. And worse, unpredictability is a double-edged blade. The same chaos that makes you feared can make you unstable in the eyes of those who hold real power. Kings surrounded by madness are eventually replaced. Leaders who cannot be relied upon are quietly sidelined. Even fear has its limits. When the cost of serving you outweighs the cost of rebellion, the most obedient will find courage in desperation. So the question remains, is this true power, or merely the illusion of it, built on trembling ground? Is control through fear as strong as influence through respect? And if no one dares to speak honestly to you, who will warn you when the walls begin to crack? Power thrives not in isolation, but in connection, however calculated. To rule, you must be seen. But to survive, you must not vanish entirely. Even the most feared must remain anchored to the world. For the one who cuts all ties does not ascend. They fall in silence. Let us now consider the danger of withdrawal. Of building walls too high. Power does not exist in the void. It is not a thing stored like gold in a vault, safe behind walls and silence. It is a current, an invisible force that flows between people, sustained by perception, acknowledgement, and fear. The 18th law, do not build a fortress to protect yourself, isolation is dangerous, stands as a necessary counterbalance to the seductive pull of withdrawal. For while absence can elevate, prolonged isolation erodes. Hide too long, retreat too completely, and the world forgets you not as a myth, but as a ghost. The mind moves on. Loyalties shift. New figures rise in the silence you left behind. Power, after all, is not merely held, it is seen being held. It requires an audience. Without witnesses, even the mightiest crown is meaningless. Consider the monarch who, fearing betrayal, withdraws from court, cancels appearances, speaks only through intermediaries. At first, the mystery may deepen their aura. But soon, the absence breeds doubt. Whispers begin, asterisk, is the king still in control? Is he ill? Dead? Replaced, asterisk, ministers act without approval. Allies form new alliances. The very power the ruler sought to protect dissolves, not through attack, but through neglect. Authority is performative. A king who does not appear is no longer a king in the minds of his people. He is a rumor, a name on a seal, a hollow echo in an empty throne room. This law speaks to a fundamental paradox. To be powerful, you must be present, but not too present. To be respected, you must be seen, but not too often. The art lies in movement, drifting through circles, appearing at key moments, making your presence felt without overexposure. Like a comet, you streak across the sky, leaving light in your wake, then vanish before you become common. You attend the gathering not every night, but at the crucial one. You speak not in every meeting, but when the decision is made. You remain visible enough to be real, distant enough to be revered. And yet, this is where the tension with Law 16 becomes most acute. Absence can elevate, yes, but only if you return. Isolation is not the same as strategic withdrawal. One is a pause in the music, the other is the end of the song. To isolate is to assume that power resides in secrecy, in self-containment. But power is relational. It depends on the gaze of others. No one can fear you if they forget you exist. No one will obey a voice they no longer hear. Even the most feared leaders understand this. Dictators parade. CEOs give interviews. Influencers post daily. Not because they lack wisdom, but because they understand the economy of attention. Power must be renewed, reaffirmed, reenacted. It is not a static possession. It is a continuous performance. But the deeper danger of isolation is not just loss of influence, it is loss of reality. Cut off from feedback, from dissent, from the subtle cues of the world, the isolated mind begins to distort. It mistakes silence for loyalty, flattery for truth, fear for love. And when the fortress finally cracks, the fall is not gradual, it is total. So the wise do not hide. They navigate. They are neither always seen, nor ever absent. They are felt. Now, to move through the world with precision, you must not only be present, you must see clearly. Not just the stage, but the players. Let us now turn our gaze to the battlefield, to the faces of those who walk beside you, and those who wait in the shadows. There is a kind of danger that does not announce itself with threats or fury, but with silence, a quiet presence in the corner of the room, a smile that never reaches the eyes, a voice that never rises, yet remembers every word spoken in its presence. The 19th law, know who you're dealing with, do not offend the wrong person, is not a call to cowardice, but to perception. It warns that power is not always visible in titles, wealth, or volume. Sometimes, it hides in the assistant who knows every secret, the quiet relative with influence behind the scenes, the overlooked colleague whose network stretches deeper than anyone realizes. To insult, dismiss, or underestimate such a person is not a minor misstep, it is an invitation to unseen retaliation. The world is not always ruled by the loudest or the most visible. Often, it is shaped by those who wait, who bide their time, who do not react when slighted, but file the moment away, like a seed planted in dark soil, waiting for the right conditions to grow. The person you mock for their silence may be the one who controls access to the decision-maker. The one you bypass in a meeting may be the confidant who whispers in the ear of power. The subordinate you treat with casual cruelty may have allies you've never heard of, debts owed in secret, or a memory longer than your career. This law demands a kind of constant vigilance, an awareness that every interaction carries weight, that every slight, however small, can echo in ways you cannot foresee. It is not enough to assess strength by appearance. You must ask, who do they know? Who owes them? Who would act on their behalf, even without being asked? The weakest-looking adversary may be the most dangerous precisely because they are underestimated. They move without resistance, strike without warning, and vanish before the cause of the damage is understood. And yet, this awareness borders on paranoia. To live by this law is to see every smile as potentially calculated, every kindness as possibly strategic, every quiet person as a potential threat. It asks you to study not just what people do, but who they are beneath the surface, their history, their connections, their capacity for patience and vengeance. In doing so, it protects you from ruin. But it also isolates you. For if you are always watching for hidden knives, can you ever relax? Can you ever trust a hand extended in friendship, or will you always wonder what lies beneath it? The deeper question is not whether caution is wise, but whether it is sustainable. If we must analyze every person as a potential danger, do we not become prisoners of our own vigilance? Action requires risk. To hesitate at every step, to weigh every word, to fear every quiet presence, is to freeze in place. And in the world of power, stillness is often the first sign of decline. And so, a new strategy emerges, not confrontation, not caution, but evasion. To take no side. To make no enemies. To float above the fray, unclaimed, uncommitted. Perhaps the safest position is not strength, but neutrality. Let us now consider the power of not choosing, of staying unattached, until the moment is right. There is a quiet strength in neutrality, a kind of invisible resilience that comes not from standing firm, but from never having to. The 20th law, do not commit to anyone, does not speak of betrayal or cowardice, but of preservation through detachment. In a world where loyalties shift like sand, where ideologies rise and crumble within a decade, where friends become enemies and enemies become allies, the one constant is change. And the most adaptable force is not the loudest voice in the chorus, but the silent observer on the edge of the room, the one who listens, waits, and says nothing. They do not raise their hand. They do not sign the pledge. They do not swear allegiance. And because they have not chosen, they are never truly defeated. Alliances are fragile. They are born of convenience, sustained by mutual need, and shattered by shifting winds. The moment you bind yourself to a cause, a leader, a group, you become part of their fate. When they fall, you fall with them, not necessarily in body, but in reputation, in influence, in opportunity. The revolutionary who dies for the movement. The executive who rises with a CEO, only to be purged when they fall. The friend who defends another too loudly, and becomes a target by association. To commit is to risk everything on a future you cannot control. But to remain uncommitted is to keep your feet on solid ground, even as the earth shakes beneath others. The wise do not rush to take sides. They let the battle rage. They watch as factions exhaust themselves, as egos clash, as the weak are exposed and the overconfident overreach. And only when the outcome begins to clarify, when the victor is nearly certain, do they step forward, not as a fighter, but as a supporter. Suddenly, they are on the winning side. They are praised not for courage, but for foresight. Their silence is reinterpreted as wisdom. Their absence from the early struggle is forgotten. And in the new order, they are not a survivor of the old, they are a natural part of the new. This is the law of the survivor. Not the hero, not the martyr, but the one who endures. History rarely celebrates them, but power often belongs to them. They are the advisors who serve every regime, the diplomats who speak to all parties, the investors who wait until the market crashes before buying. They understand that conviction is a luxury. Flexibility is power. But this law carries a quiet erosion of the soul. If you never commit, do you ever truly live? Is survival enough? To float above the fray is to avoid destruction, but it is also to avoid depth. Love requires risk. Belief requires sacrifice. Change requires voices willing to be heard early, loudly, and alone. And if we wait for certainty before acting, we may never act at all. Worse, the uncommitted may never be trusted. They are useful, perhaps, but never beloved. Never seen as loyal. In moments of true crisis, when the world needs those who stand regardless of cost, the neutral are absent. And when the dust settles, even the victors may look upon them with quiet disdain, not as allies, but as opportunists wearing the mask of wisdom. So we are left with a silent question: is it better to fall with meaning, or to stand alone, unscarred but unseen? And if commitment is dangerous, what if the safest disguise is not silence, but stupidity? Let us now consider the power of being underestimated, of appearing less than you are. There is a peculiar kind of intelligence that does not announce itself with sharp words or quick comebacks, but with silence, with a delayed blink, with a smile that seems just a moment too slow. The 21st law, play a sucker to catch a sucker, seem dumber than your mark, reveals a paradox at the heart of power. The greatest advantage often lies not in proving your brilliance, but in letting others believe they've outwitted you. For pride is the mind's blind spot. When someone is convinced of their superiority, especially over someone they perceive as simple, clumsy, or naive, they do not merely relax. They perform. They explain too much. They reveal their strategies, their insecurities, their weaknesses, all in the act of demonstrating how much smarter they are. And in that moment of arrogant exposition, they hand you the keys to their mind. To seem less is not to be less. It is to become invisible in plain sight. The one who stumbles over words, who misplaces files, who nods along with a vague expression, they are not noticed as a threat. They are dismissed. And in that dismissal, they are free to observe, to listen, to learn. Like a hunter who moves slowly through the underbrush, mimicking the rustle of the wind, the wise dissembler wears the mask of incompetence not out of shame, but strategy. They let the other win the argument, claim the credit, take the spotlight, because they know the game extends beyond the moment. The true victory comes later, in silence, when the overconfident have revealed everything and the one they underestimated finally acts. This is not mere deception. It is a reversal of hierarchy disguised as humility. The fool in the royal court was often the only one who could speak truth to power, because he was not taken seriously. His jokes were wisdom in disguise. His clumsiness, a shield. In the same way, the employee who pretends not to understand the politics of the office may be the one who ultimately navigates them most skillfully. The negotiator who feigns confusion may be the one who later controls the terms. The lover who plays naive may be the one who, in time, holds the emotional upper hand. But this law carries a quiet cost. When intelligence is hidden behind the veil of stupidity, it risks being forgotten, even by oneself. How long can you pretend to be less before you begin to believe it? And in a world where everyone is performing ignorance, who dares to be truly wise? If no one speaks plainly, if every gesture is layered with irony, every word a potential trap, then truth itself becomes a relic, spoken only in private, if at all. Worse, the habitual dissembler may find themselves isolated. No one confides in a fool. No one trusts a performer. And if you are always seen as harmless, can you ever be seen as powerful until it's too late? And yet, in the right moment, the mask slips. The fool speaks with sudden clarity. The clumsy hand delivers the precise strike. The one who was laughed at becomes the one who controls the room. For power does not always belong to the loudest. Sometimes, it belongs to the one who waited, smiling, silent, underestimated. Now, if strength can be hidden in weakness, What if weakness itself can be worn as armor? Not as a mask, but as a weapon? Let us now consider the quiet power of surrender, of yielding not in defeat, but in design. There is a deep cultural reverence for resistance, for the hero who stands firm, who fights to the end, who dies rather than yield. But history also whispers of another kind of strength, the one who kneels, not in defeat, but in calculation. The 22nd law, use the surrender tactic, transform weakness into power, challenges the instinct to resist at all costs. It suggests that sometimes, the most courageous act is not defiance, but deliberate surrender, the conscious choice to fall back, to accept disgrace, to appear broken, all while preserving the one thing that cannot be reclaimed once lost, the chance to continue. For when force meets force, the stronger prevails. But when force meets yielding, it often falters, confused by the lack of resistance, disarmed by the absence of struggle. Imagine the general surrounded, outnumbered, his army shattered. To fight on is annihilation. But to lay down his sword, to kneel before the conqueror, is not the end, it is a reprieve. He lives. He watches. He learns the rhythms of the new regime, the arrogance of the victor, the cracks forming beneath the surface of power. And when the time comes, when the conqueror grows careless, when dissent stirs in the ranks, he rises again, not as a rebel, but as a liberator. His surrender was not submission. It was the first phase of a longer war. This tactic thrives on misdirection. The one who surrenders is no longer seen as a threat. They are dismissed, relegated to the margins, forgotten. And in that obscurity, they rebuild, not just resources, but influence, alliances, resolve. The accused who accepts exile instead of execution becomes a legend in exile, their suffering turning into moral authority. The executive who quietly resigns after a scandal returns years later as a reformed visionary, welcomed back with open arms. The lover who accepts heartbreak without protest becomes the one mourned, idealized, eventually sought after. By not resisting, they shift the narrative, from villain to victim, from opponent to martyr. And from that position, they gain power not through force, but through perception. But this law walks a razor's edge. There is a point at which surrender ceases to be strategy and becomes erasure. How long can one endure humiliation, public disgrace, private doubt, the slow erosion of self-worth, before the act of submission consumes the self? To play the defeated is to risk becoming defeated. The mind begins to believe its own performance. The body remembers the posture of shame. And the longer one remains on their knees, the harder it becomes to rise. Worse, surrender, when prolonged, can become habit. The one who has survived by yielding may forget how to fight. They may begin to prefer invisibility, mistaking safety for peace. And yet, in the right hands, surrender is not weakness, it is alchemy. It turns defeat into patience, loss into preparation, disgrace into disguise. It is the quiet before the storm, the breath before the strike. For power is not always in the hand that strikes. Sometimes, it is in the one that stays still, waiting, healing, becoming inevitable. Now, when the moment finally comes to act, when the silence breaks and the game begins in earnest, there can be no hesitation, no division of purpose, only a single, focused force, aimed with precision at the heart of the matter. Let us now gather our strength and concentrate our forces. There is a quiet tragedy in spreading oneself too thin, a slow erosion of potential that often goes unnoticed until it's too late. The 23rd law, concentrate your forces, speaks not merely to strategy, but to the physics of influence. Power, like light, loses its intensity when scattered. A beam diffused across a wide surface warms nothing. But when focused through a lens, it can ignite flame. So too with human effort, time, emotion, attention, resources, when divided among too many causes, too many conflicts, too many ambitions, dissipate into insignificance. To win, you must not only choose your battle, you must abandon all others. This is not a call to multitasking, to balance, to the modern ideal of being everything to everyone. It is a demand for ruthless prioritization. The artist who masters one medium does not do so by dabbled in 10. The general who wins a decisive victory does not divide his army across 5 fronts. He gathers every soldier, every supply, every thought, and drives them toward a single objective. In that convergence, momentum builds. Doubt fades. The world begins to bend toward the force of singular intent. Obsession, so often pathologized, becomes the engine of transformation. It is not balance that moves mountains, but in balance, energy poured so completely into one direction that resistance becomes irrelevant. History is littered with the well-intentioned, the talented, the versatile, those who could have changed the world, had they chosen one thing to change. But they scattered their gifts. They responded to every distraction, defended every minor front, allowed their attention to be pulled in every direction by duty, emotion, or fleeting interest. And in the end, they left no mark. Meanwhile, the ones remembered, the creators, the conquerors, the revolutionaries, were often seen as unbalanced, even mad. They neglected relationships. They ignored conventions. They sacrificed comfort, morality, even health, because they were moving toward one thing, and one thing only. But this law carries a deep cost. In the pursuit of focus, humanity often frays at the edges. To concentrate all forces is to neglect the periphery, to ignore love, beauty, rest, the small joys that give life texture. The mind sharpens, but the soul may wither. The body breaks under unrelenting pressure. Relationships dissolve, not from malice, but from absence. And when the goal is finally reached, the victor may stand atop the summit, breathless and victorious, only to realize they have become a stranger to themselves. Worse, total focus can breed blindness. When all vision is directed forward, you do not see the shifts around you, the changing tides, the quiet betrayals, the new threats emerging from the corners you stopped watching. Like a laser that cuts through steel but cannot swerve, the hyper-focused are powerful, but fragile. A single miscalculation, a change in wind, and the entire structure collapses. And yet, without concentration, there is no breakthrough. No masterpiece. No revolution. No legacy. The alternative, diffused energy, constant compromise, endless adaptation, is not peace. It is irrelevance. So the question is not whether to focus, but how. Can obsession be tempered with awareness? Can singular purpose coexist with inner balance? Or must power always demand sacrifice? Perhaps the answer lies not in rejecting focus, but in choosing the right target, one worthy of the fire. Now, having gathered our strength, how shall we move through the world? Not with force, not with noise, but with grace, like a shadow slipping through the court. Let us now study the quiet mastery of presence without threat. The art of the perfect courtier. There is a world within the world, a hidden dimension that exists not in laws or armies, but in glances, whispers, and unspoken hierarchies. It lives in the corridors of power, where influence is not seized, but absorbed. This is the realm of the court, not always a literal palace, but any space where egos cluster, boardrooms, creative circles, political circles, even families. And in this world, the loudest do not always win. the strongest do not always rise. The one who endures is not the rebel, but the one who moves like water, adapting, reflecting, flowing without resistance. The 24th law, play the perfect courtier, reveals the quiet mastery of presence without threat, of service without servility, of power without appearing to hold it at all. The perfect courtier is not a sycophant. They do not flatter clumsily, nor do they grovel. Their charm is precise, calibrated to the insecurities and vanities of those in power. They know when to laugh, when to nod, when to offer a compliment so subtle it feels like discovery. Asterisk, it's remarkable how you saw that solution so quickly, no one else would have. Asterisk, they make the powerful feel not just admired, but insightful, inevitable. And in doing so, they become indispensable, not through force, but through emotional precision. They are useful, but never urgent. Available, but never desperate. They anticipate needs before they are spoken, a document before it's requested, a silence when tension rises, a well-placed word that redirects conflict without naming it. They advise not by commanding, but by questioning. Asterisk, have you considered how this might look to someone outside the room? Asterisk, a suggestion disguised as curiosity. And when they speak, it is never to outshine, but to elevate. They reflect the light of others so perfectly that their own glow goes unnoticed. But the true genius of the courtier lies in their invisibility. They know when to step forward and when to vanish. They do not cling to the spotlight. They do not demand recognition. And because they appear to want nothing, they are trusted with everything. Secrets are shared in their presence not because they pry, but because they seem harmless, like furniture, like air. Yet they absorb every tremor, every shift in tone, every unguarded moment. Over time, they know more than the king. But this life of reflection carries a quiet erosion. When you spend years mirroring others, adapting to their moods, shaping yourself to their desires, who are you beneath the performance? The face in the mirror begins to blur. You forget your own opinions, your own desires, your own voice. You become a vessel for other people's egos. And if one day the court falls, the king is deposed, the circle dissolves, what remains of you? Not wealth, not legacy, but the ghost of a role you played so well, you no longer remember where it ended and you began. And yet, the courtier survives revolutions. They serve new masters without scandal. They shift allegiances like changing coats. Because they never claimed loyalty, they only served the game. Now, if identity can be worn like a mask, what if it can also be discarded? Not just adapted, but reinvented? Let us now consider the power of becoming someone entirely new. Of shedding the past like a skin. There is a quiet lie we are taught from childhood, that we must be ourselves. As if the self were a fixed star, constant and unchanging, something to be discovered and preserved. But the 25th law, recreate yourself, shatters that illusion with a radical truth. Identity is not a fact, it is a performance. A construction. A story written in pencil, not stone. And like any story, it can be revised, rewritten, even burned and started anew. The most powerful figures in history are not always those born into greatness, but those who refused the roles assigned to them, who shed their origins like old skin and emerged as something else entirely. A peasant becomes a prophet. A failed artist becomes a dictator. A quiet clerk becomes a revolutionary. They do not wait for the world to see them. They force the world to see a version of themselves they invented. This is not mere self-improvement. It is self-invention. You do not become who you are, you become who you need to be. You change your name, your voice, your mannerisms, your past. You craft a legend, born in hardship, tested by fire, destined for greatness. You speak of your history not as it was, but as it must be remembered. The truth is not irrelevant, it is secondary. What matters is believability, consistency, the aura of inevitability. People do not follow facts. They follow myths. And if you can make your myth feel real, it becomes real. Consider the actor who transforms from romantic lead to statesman, the entrepreneur who rebrands their failure as a heroic struggle, the exile who returns not as a refugee, but as a savior. They do not deny their past, they reinterpret it. Every flaw becomes a lesson. Every defeat, a necessary step. Every silence, a sign of depth. The self is not erased, it is curated. And in that curation, power is born. Because the one who controls their own narrative controls how the world sees them. But this law is not without vertigo. If you can become anyone, then who are you? If identity is a mask, and you wear it long enough, does it fuse to your face? And when you look inward, do you find a soul or an archive of roles? To recreate yourself is to gain freedom, yes, but also to lose something primal, the comfort of being known, even if that knowledge is outdated, limiting, or false. Worse, the more dramatic the reinvention, the more fragile it becomes. A constructed self requires constant maintenance. One inconsistency, one slip, and the illusion cracks. The public demands continuity. They want their heroes to have always been heroic, their leaders to have always been destined for greatness. And when the truth leaks, when the old name surfaces, the forgotten accent returns, the photograph from the past appears, the fall can be catastrophic. Not because the lie was told, but because the world hates to admit it was complicit in the fiction. And yet, without reinvention, growth is impossible. We are not meant to remain who we were at 20, or 30, or 40. To evolve is to betray the past. So the question is not whether to recreate, but how honestly. Can you shape yourself without losing yourself entirely? Can you become a myth and still remember the human beneath? Now, having reshaped your identity, how do you wield power without staining your name? How do you win without being seen as the one who struck the blow? Let us now consider the art of invisible victory, of power exercised at a distance. There is a quiet distance between decision and deed, a space where the powerful stand, untouched by consequence, while others move in the shadows to execute their will. The 26th law, keep your hands clean, is not about innocence. It is about optics. It is the understanding that power cannot survive direct contact with brutality, scandal, or moral compromise. The leader who personally silences a critic, fires a loyalist in anger, or demands a bribe becomes visible, not as a ruler, but as a criminal. But the one who never raises their voice, who merely regrets the unfortunate events that follow, who shakes their head at the excessive actions of subordinates, this is the one who remains untouchable. Their image stays pure, their reputation intact, even as the machinery of control turns beneath them. This is the art of delegation as deflection. You do not issue the order, you create the conditions for it to be carried out. A knowing glance, a vague suggestion, a promotion given to someone eager to prove their loyalty. The enforcer acts not because they were commanded, but because they anticipate your desires. And when the act is done, the rival discredited, the obstacle removed, the truth buried, the world looks not to you, but to them. The scapegoat takes the fall. The subordinate is fired, the advisor exiled, the soldier court-martialed. You express disappointment. You uphold justice. And in doing so, you emerge not as the cause, but as the solution. History is filled with rulers who mastered this distance. The king who never speaks of assassination, yet wakes to find his enemy dead. The CEO who was unaware of the smear campaign against a competitor. The politician who condemns violence while their supporters chant in the streets. Their power is not diminished by denial, it is enhanced. Because they remain above the fray, they are seen as necessary, even righteous. They are not the storm. They are the calm after it. But this law demands a chilling detachment. To keep your hands clean, you must be willing to let others be stained. You must watch as loyalty is punished, as truth is buried, as good people do bad things in your name. You must accept that the very people who serve you most faithfully will be the ones the world blames. And you must never, under any circumstance, show remorse that might suggest complicity. Compassion, in this game, is a crack in the armor. And yet, the deeper cost is invisible. The hands may be clean, but the soul is not. There is a silence that follows each unspoken command, each conveniently timed dismissal, each act of plausible deniability. It lives in the quiet moments, when the performance ends and you are alone with the knowledge of what was done, and what you allowed. Can power exist without guilt? Without blood, even if it is not on your skin? And if no one can see the strings, does that mean they are not there? Perhaps the most dangerous illusion is not the public's belief in your purity, but your own. But what if influence went beyond actions? What if you could shape not just what people do, but what they believe? Not through force, but through faith? Let us now consider the power of belief, of turning followers into disciples, of creating not just obedience, but worship. There is a quiet ache in the human spirit, an unspoken longing not just for survival, but for significance. We do not merely want to live. We want to belong to something larger than ourselves, a mission, a movement, a truth. The 27th law, play on people's need to believe, create a cult-like following, speaks to this deep vulnerability in the soul. It is not logic that moves masses, but myth. Not facts, but feeling. And the most enduring power does not come from coercion or wealth, but from the ability to offer meaning, to become not just a leader, but a symbol, a prophet, a cause incarnate. When you give people a story in which they are the chosen, the enlightened, the righteous few, you do not ask for obedience. You inspire devotion. And devotion is far more powerful than fear. To create a following is not to gather fans, but to forge identity. You offer a new name, not just employees, but disciples, not citizens, but believers, not customers, but initiates. You craft rituals, daily affirmations, symbolic gestures, exclusive gatherings that reinforce belonging. You define an enemy, the skeptic, the outsider, the corrupt system. And in doing so, you make loyalty feel sacred. To question is no longer mere disagreement, it becomes heresy. To leave is not a choice, but betrayal. The group becomes a family, and you, its parent, its oracle, its moral compass. This is not limited to religious fanatics or dictators. It lives in revolutionary movements, in visionary companies, in social tribes. The brand that doesn't sell products but a lifestyle. The politician who doesn't offer policies but salvation. The artist who doesn't perform but conducts a spiritual experience. These are not accidents. They are applications of this law. People do not follow ideas. They follow identities. And when you allow someone to see themselves as part of something noble, they will defend it fiercely, even against evidence, even against reason. But this law reveals a haunting truth: reason is fragile. The mind may question, but the heart clings to certainty. A well-crafted belief system does not just comfort, it consumes. It simplifies a chaotic world into a clear narrative, asterisk we are good. They are wrong. We will prevail, asterisk, and in that simplicity, people find peace. They surrender doubt, critical thought, individuality, because the cost of freedom is too high. Belonging is easier. And so we must ask, are we all, in some way, members of a cult? Do we not bow before ideologies, nations, celebrities, even philosophies, with the same unquestioning loyalty we mock in others? The patriot who sees no flaw in their country. The fan who defends their idol against all accusation. The believer who dismisses science in favor of doctrine. We all seek meaning. And meaning, once found, becomes sacred. The danger is not in belief itself, but in the closure it brings. When truth becomes dogma, growth stops. When loyalty becomes worship, thought dies. And the leader who begins as a guide can become a prisoner of their own myth, unable to change, to admit error, to evolve, because the followers demand consistency, not honesty. Yet the power is undeniable. To shape not actions, but souls, that is the deepest conquest. But belief, no matter how strong, remains inert without movement. It must be activated, ignited, not by caution, not by calculation, but by something far more volatile. Let us now consider the force of sheer audacity, of boldness as a weapon. There is a moment before every decision when the mind hesitates, a flicker of doubt, a whisper of fear, a calculation of risk. And in that pause, power often slips away. The 28th law, enter action with boldness, teaches that hesitation is not prudence, it is paralysis disguised as thought. In the theater of human dynamics, perception precedes reality. The world does not wait for you to be ready. It responds to movement. And nothing commands attention, shifts momentum, or bends resistance like the sudden, unflinching step forward. Even a flawed plan, launched with absolute conviction, can succeed, not because it was perfect, but because it moved too fast for opposition to organize. Boldness is not the absence of fear. It is the refusal to let fear dictate timing. Imagine two rivals approaching the same opportunity. One studies, prepares, waits for the perfect moment. The other strides in, speaks with authority, acts as if ownership is already theirs. Who is more likely to be granted access? Who will be assumed to belong? The mind defaults to confidence. People assume that the bold must know something they do not. That their certainty is rooted in unseen strength. And so, doors open. Allies emerge. Resources flow. The very act of boldness creates its own justification. Like a lion charging across the savannah, the force of motion terrifies, even if the lion is injured, underfed, bluffing. The prey flees not because they've been struck, but because they believe they will be. This is the alchemy of audacity. It turns uncertainty into inevitability. In business, the founder who presents a shaky idea with unwavering belief raises millions. In politics, the candidate who speaks as if they've already won begins to be treated as the frontrunner. In personal life, the one who declares love first, who makes the unexpected move, who seizes the conversation, shapes the narrative before anyone else can react. Hesitation, no matter how wise, is interpreted as weakness. Boldness, no matter how reckless, is interpreted as strength. But this law carries a silent reckoning. For boldness is not wisdom. It is energy, momentum, illusion. And when the initial wave of awe fades, when the eyes begin to narrow and the questions begin, asterisk, who are they? Where's the proof? What's the plan, asterisk, the foundation may crack. The bluff may be called. The lion, having roared, must now fight. And if there is nothing behind the performance, the fall is not gradual. It is total. Worse, boldness can become a trap. Once you have declared yourself, retreated, or admitted doubt, you lose the spell. You cannot be both audacious and cautious. The mask must stay on. And so, the performer must keep moving, keep speaking, keep acting, because to slow down is to reveal the emptiness behind the gesture. And yet, without that first bold step, nothing begins. No empire, no love, no revolution was ever born from perfect preparation. Fortune favors not the flawless, but the fearless, the ones who act while others are still thinking. But action without direction is not power. It is noise. And noise, no matter how loud, eventually fades. What remains is not the roar, but the plan behind it. The unseen architecture. The quiet mind that knew not just when to move, but where. Let us now turn from impulse to intention. From motion to mastery. For even the boldest stride must be guided by foresight. There is a difference between acting and moving, between reacting to the moment and orchestrating it. The 29th law, plan all the way to the end, is the quiet counterbalance to the fire of boldness. It reminds us that power is not sustained by flashes of brilliance, but by foresight, the ability to see not just the immediate gain, but the ripple that follows the stone. Every word spoken, every alliance formed, every enemy made is not an isolated event, but a link in a chain stretching far into the future. The amateur celebrates the victory of today, blind to the consequences of tomorrow. The master, however, does not make a move until they have imagined its echo, how it will be interpreted, who will benefit, who will resent, and what new forces it will awaken. This is not mere strategy. It is anticipation elevated to art. The wise do not just ask, will this work? They ask, what happens after it works? The politician who defeats a rival must then consider, who among the fallen one's allies now feels threatened? Who will seek revenge? The lover who wins back their partner must wonder, will the restored trust be deeper, or will it always carry the shadow of past betrayal? The executive who secures a promotion must ask, who now stands in their former position, quietly building resentment? Power is not taken, it is maintained. And maintenance requires vision beyond the horizon of the present. History is littered with those who won the battle and lost the war, revolutionaries who toppled tyrants only to become worse, leaders who achieved their goals and then drifted into irrelevance, lovers who reclaimed affection only to find it hollow. They succeeded in the moment, but failed in the aftermath. Because they did not plan for the silence after the storm. And yet, this law demands a chilling detachment. To plan all the way to the end is to reduce people to variables, emotions to predictable patterns, love and loyalty to conditional responses. It asks you to see the future as a sequence of cause and effect, where every human reaction is a foreseeable step in a grand design. But can such calculation account for the unpredictable surge of passion? For the sudden act of mercy? For the friend who betrays not out of ambition, but pain? For the random chance that alters everything, a missed message, a chance encounter, a moment of unexpected courage? The deeper cost of such planning is presence. When every moment is seen as a means to an end, can you ever truly inhabit it? If your mind is always 3 steps ahead, are you ever really here? To live entirely in the future is to miss the texture of the now, the warmth of a laugh not used as a tool, the quiet joy of a gesture given freely, the peace of acting not for gain, but for love. And still, without foresight, even the boldest fall. The unprepared triumph is fragile. The unplanned victory often collapses under its own weight. So the tension remains, between living and calculating, between spontaneity and control. Perhaps the truest mastery lies not in rejecting emotion, but in weaving it into the design, anticipating not just what people will do, but how they will feel. But once the plan is fulfilled, once the goal is reached, how should you carry yourself in victory? Not just what you do, but how you appear. Let us now consider the final illusion, the power of effortlessness. There is a quiet theater to power, and like all great performances, its most convincing moments appear spontaneous, unrehearsed, natural, almost accidental. The 30th law, make your accomplishments seem effortless, is not a call to laziness, but to mastery of image. For in the eyes of the world, struggle is not admirable, it is alarming. When people see you strain, sweat, hesitate, or confess difficulty, they do not admire your perseverance. They sense vulnerability. They wonder, if it took this much to succeed once, what happens when the pressure increases? But when success arrives with silence, with a shrug, with the quiet certainty of something that was always meant to be, it feels unshakable. Effortless mastery does not invite scrutiny. It commands awe. Consider the dancer who moves as if gravity does not apply, the writer whose prose flows like water, the leader who resolves a crisis without raising their voice. None of them speak of sleepless nights, of drafts torn apart, of secret doubts. They do not boast. They do not explain. They simply are. And in that stillness, their power becomes mythic. It is not seen as earned, but as inherent, as if they were born with the crown already upon their head. The illusion is not that they never worked, but that work was never required. And in that illusion, their dominance feels eternal, unchallengeable. This is the lie of elegance, the polished surface that conceals the years of fracture beneath. The pianist who plays a flawless concert has spent thousands of hours alone, repeating the same phrase until the fingers bled. The entrepreneur who luckily built an empire endured years of obscurity, rejection, and near ruin. But to reveal that history is to humanize, to make the extraordinary seem accessible. And accessibility invites competition. If people believe greatness is possible through effort, they may try to surpass you. But if greatness appears to be a gift, a birthright, a force of nature, they will not challenge it. They will only watch. And yet, this law carries a quiet sorrow. In hiding the struggle, we erase the truth of the climb. We offer inspiration without honesty. We tell the world, this is how it looks when you win, but never this is how it feels when you almost lose. And in doing so, we leave others to suffer in silence, believing their own effort is a sign of inadequacy, not dedication. The young artist stares at a masterpiece and thinks, I could never be that talented, not knowing it was built on 1,000 failures no one was meant to see. Worse, the performer of effortlessness risks losing touch with their own journey. When you spend years pretending the battle was easy, you begin to forget its weight. You may even come to believe your own myth, until the day you face something truly difficult, and find you've forgotten how to struggle openly, how to ask for help, how to be human. But in the game of influence, perception is the final authority. And nothing secures power like the appearance of inevitability. So the wise do not parade their labor. They let their results speak, and let the world assume it was always easy. Now, if perception can be shaped, what if the entire game could be designed from the start? Not just how you win, but what the rules are. Let us now consider the deeper art of control. Of not just playing the game, but dealing the cards. There is a subtle form of dominance that does not announce itself with commands or force, but with the quiet shaping of possibility. The 31st law, control the options, get others to play with the cards you deal, reveals that true power is not found in making the final choice, but in determining what choices are available. Freedom, as it is commonly understood, is often a carefully staged illusion. When you present someone with options, you do not grant them liberty, you guide them. And if every path leads to your desired outcome, then their decision was never truly theirs. The real power lies not in the vote, but in who drew the ballot. Consider a simple question. Would you like to discuss this now, or after the meeting? On the surface, it feels like generosity, an offer of autonomy. But both answers keep the conversation alive. The person believes they are choosing timing, when in fact, they are only choosing how soon they will engage. The structure of the choice has already been rigged. There is no option to walk away, to refuse, to change the subject. The frame itself is the trap. And because the victim helped make the decision, they feel ownership of it, never realizing the boundaries were drawn long before they arrived. This law thrives in politics, business, relationships. A manager says, asterisk, you can take the early shift or the late one, what works for you? Asterisk, the employee feels heard. But the third shift, the one no one wants, is already assigned. Or a partner says, asterisk, do you want to stay, or should we work on this together? Asterisk, the question assumes commitment. There is no space for honest doubt, for walking away. The only real decision is how to stay, not if. This is not mere persuasion. It is the architecture of influence, the invisible design of reality. The master does not argue. They set the stage. They define the terms. They eliminate unwanted outcomes not through force, but through omission. What is not offered cannot be chosen. And what is offered feels like freedom. But this law unsettles the soul. If all decisions are shaped before they are made, what becomes of free will? Is it not just a flicker of thought within a cage of engineered choices? We believe we are choosing, when in fact, we are only selecting from a menu written by someone else. The illusion of control is so complete that we thank them for the opportunity. And yet, this is how systems endure. Revolutions are not crushed by violence alone, but by limiting what people can imagine. Reform is not defeated by resistance, but by offering only shallow alternatives. Even love can be manipulated this way, by making someone feel they have chosen you freely, when every condition, every emotional cue, every moment of vulnerability was orchestrated to lead them here. The deeper danger is that we all do this, to some degree. Parents frame choices for children. Leaders shape narratives for followers. Lovers curate the image they present. We are all dealers of cards, arranging the deck to favor the outcome we desire. But awareness is the first step toward autonomy. To see the frame is to question it. To recognize the limits of choice is to begin searching for the door that wasn't shown. And while people are busy choosing between what's offered, what if they could be led not by logic, but by longing? Not by what is real, but by what they wish were. Let us now turn from control to enchantment, from options to illusions. For nothing captivates like a beautiful lie. There is a quiet hunger in the human spirit, not just for survival, but for transcendence. Reality, in its raw form, is often mundane, filled with limits, compromises, and the slow erosion of time. But fantasy? Fantasy is boundless. It promises escape, elevation, a life where meaning is clear, suffering has purpose, and victory is certain. The 30-second law, play to people's fantasies, recognizes this deep yearning and turns it into a lever of influence. People do not march for spreadsheets. They march for flags, for prophecies, for the image of a better world shimmering just beyond the horizon. To lead is not to inform, but to enchant. Not to explain, but to inspire. And inspiration is not born of data, it is born of dream. The most enduring movements in history were not built on logic, but on myth. The revolutionary who speaks not of policy, but of rebirth. The entrepreneur who doesn't sell a product, but a future where you are richer, thinner, loved. The lover who doesn't list their virtues, but paints a vision of a life together, sunlit mornings, quiet laughter, a home filled with meaning. These are not lies, not always. But they are selective truths, amplified, polished, wrapped in emotion until they glow like embers in the dark. And because they speak to what people want to believe, not what they know to be true, they bypass reason and settle in the heart. This is the power of narrative over fact. A politician does not win by detailing tax reforms. They win by making people feel, for the first time in years, that they matter, that their pain is seen, their voice heard, their nation restored. A brand does not succeed by listing features. It succeeds by selling identity. The watch is not for telling time, but for becoming the kind of person who wears it. Religion does not endure because it answers every question, but because it answers the one that matters. What does my life mean? But this law carries a quiet melancholy. For every dream sold is also a truth deferred. When you feed someone's fantasy, you offer comfort, but you may also delay awakening. The employee who believes next year will bring the promotion that never comes. The follower who waits for the leader to save them, while their own power atrophies. The lover who stays in a failing relationship because the dream of what it could be is still brighter than the reality of what it is. And when the fantasy ends, when the leader fails, the product disappoints, the lover breaks away, what remains? Often, not just loss, but shame. The dreamer must face the uncomfortable truth. They were not betrayed by the liar, but by their own desire to believe. Worse, a world built on fantasy is fragile. Once the spell breaks, disillusionment spreads faster than faith ever did. And the one who sold the dream, the storyteller, the leader, the seducer, may find themselves not mourned, but hunted. And yet, without fantasy, there is no progress. Every great achievement began as an impossible idea. Every revolution was once a whisper. To inspire is not always manipulation, it is sometimes the first act of creation. The danger is not in dreaming, but in forgetting that dreams must eventually meet the ground. But if you can awaken desire, if you can make someone ache for a future only you seem to offer, then you hold more than their attention. You hold their will. And if you can shape their dreams, how much deeper can you go? Not to their hopes, but to their fears. To the hidden pressure point beneath the surface. Let us now search for the secret lever. The weakness only they know exists. There is a silent fault line running through every person, a hidden fracture beneath the surface of confidence, charm, or composure. The 33rd law, discover each man's thumbscrew, speaks to the intimate mechanics of influence. True power does not come from brute force, but from precision. It is not enough to dominate. You must understand. To observe not just what people say, but what they overcompensate for, not just what they desire, but what they are afraid of losing. For within every individual, there is a lever, a pressure point, a single point of vulnerability that, when pressed, can move them more reliably than any argument, threat, or bribe. It may be the fear of exposure, the dread that a secret will unravel their life. It may be the hunger for approval, so deep it turns every interaction into a performance. It could be loneliness, masked by busyness, greed, disguised as ambition, or a fragile self-worth that depends entirely on external validation. Find it, and you hold the key to their actions. This is not guesswork. It is detective work of the soul. It requires patience. The one who interrupts others may not be arrogant, they may be terrified of being forgotten. The colleague who takes credit for small victories may not be ambitious, but insecure, clinging to proof that they matter. The friend who gives lavish gifts may not be generous, but guilty, trying to buy loyalty before it slips away. These patterns reveal more than words ever could. Listen to what they return to in conversation. Watch what silences them. Notice what they mock. The thing they ridicule is often what they fear becoming. The man who mocks weakness may be terrified of his own. The woman who scoffs at desperation may be running from it. Once you see the crack, you can apply pressure with surgical care. You do not need to threaten. You need only hint. A quiet comment, asterisk, it's impressive how no one knows about your past with that firm. Asterisk, or a withheld compliment, suddenly, the person who thrives on praise grows anxious, eager to please. Or a carefully timed offer, asterisk, I could introduce you to people who really appreciate loyalty. Asterisk, the exchange is unspoken, but understood. You have seen their need. You can fulfill it, or deny it. And in that imbalance, you gain control. But this law carries a deep moral erosion. The more you study weakness, the more you begin to see people not as whole beings, but as collections of vulnerabilities. Compassion fades. Empathy turns into strategy. And in the process, you may forget to look inward. For the one who masters the art of finding others' thumbscrews often does so because they are running from their own. The manipulator may be the most insecure of all, using control to mask their fear of being seen, known, rejected. And if every person has a pressure point, then no one is invulnerable. Not the king, not the lover, not the friend. Strength becomes not the absence of weakness, but the skill of hiding it. Yet even the fragile can appear unbreakable. Not through truth, but through posture. Not through being strong, but through seeming it. Let us now consider the power of illusion, of wearing strength like a crown, even when the foundation trembles. There is a peculiar alchemy in the way people perceive presence, not by what you say, but by how you occupy space. The 34th law, be royal in your own fashion, act like a king to be treated like one, reveals a quiet truth: status is not bestowed so much as it is assumed. Power does not always come from rank, wealth, or force. Often, it comes from the simple, unshakable belief that you belong where others hesitate to stand. Walk into a room not with the energy of someone asking permission, but of someone who has simply arrived, because you were expected, because your presence alters the atmosphere. The body leads the mind, and the world follows. People do not question the king's right to sit on the throne. They respond to the fact that he is already seated. This is not arrogance. It is alignment. The royal demeanor is not loud. It does not demand attention. It is marked by slowness, deliberate movement, measured speech, silence that does not rush to fill the void. A king does not fidget. He does not over-explain. He listens as if time belongs to him. He speaks not to prove, but to decree. And because he moves as if the world is shaped for his passage, others unconsciously reshape themselves around him. Doors open. Voices lower. Decisions wait for his nod. It is not magic. It is mimicry of power so complete that reality bends to accommodate it. You do not need a crown to wear this posture. The artist who enters the gallery as if they belong in the center of the room will be treated as the guest of honor. The employee who speaks with calm certainty, who does not apologize for their ideas, will be heard before the one who shouts. The lover who does not cling, but holds space with quiet dignity, becomes the one pursued. The mind assumes that confidence is earned. It rarely considers that it might be performed. And so, by acting as if you are already what you wish to become, you invite the world to treat you as such. But this law forces a quiet reckoning. If power can be faked until it becomes real, then what is real about power at all? Is the crown a symbol of divine right, or just a piece of metal that only matters because everyone agrees to look at it? If authority is granted not by merit, but by performance, then hierarchy is not a structure of truth, but a shared illusion, a collective agreement to follow the one who walks with the least doubt. And if that is so, then anyone can wear the mask. But the danger lies in the gap between appearance and substance. To act like a king without the wisdom of one is to invite collapse. The throne may be claimed, but it must be held. Presence without preparation is eventually exposed. The world grants authority to those who seem to deserve it, until the moment comes when they must prove it. Still, the first step is never permission. It is assumption. No one rises by waiting to be chosen. They rise by stepping forward as if they were never absent. But even the most regal presence must respect the rhythm of the world. For power is not only in posture, but in timing. A king who returns too soon from exile may be seen not as restored, but as desperate. A leader who declares victory before the battle ends invites betrayal. Even the sun must wait for its hour. Let us now consider the silent force that governs all action. The invisible hand of timing. There is a difference between action and impact. One is movement, the other is consequence. The 35th law, master the art of timing, teaches that even the most brilliant strategy, the most courageous decision, the most flawless execution, can fail utterly if it arrives too soon or too late. Like a surfer poised on the edge of the ocean, the truly powerful do not rush. They wait. They feel the rhythm of the water, the pull of the tide, the gathering swell beneath the surface. They know that a wave too small will not carry them, and one too wild will destroy them. But when the moment comes, the precise convergence of force, direction, and balance, they rise with it, not against it, and are carried forward as if by fate itself. Power, in this sense, is not about force, but about harmony with the unseen currents of the world. Timing governs everything. A truth spoken too early is dismissed as madness. The same truth, spoken after events have unfolded, is hailed as prophecy. A proposal made when a person is exhausted, grieving, or distracted will be rejected, not because it is flawed, but because the soil of the mind is not ready to receive it. But deliver that same idea when confidence is high, when the listener is open, when the world itself seems to lean forward in anticipation, and it spreads like fire. The wise do not just act. They wait to act. They cultivate patience not as resignation, but as active readiness, mind, body, and resources poised, like a drawn bow, until the target steps into the light. This is the humility of true power. It acknowledges that not everything is controllable. You cannot force a culture to accept a new idea before it is ready. You cannot win someone's love before they are open to it. You cannot overthrow a regime when the people still fear chaos more than oppression. The most dangerous mistake is not failure, but premature success, the revolution crushed because it rose before the people could see themselves in it, the entrepreneur ruined because their vision was 10 years ahead of the market. And so, the master of timing watches the subtle signs, shifts in tone, changes in routine, the unguarded words spoken in passing, the sudden silence where there was once noise. They understand that power is not only in the hand that moves, but in the eye that sees when to move it. They are willing to let opportunities pass, knowing another, better one will come, not out of doubt, but of discipline. But this law also forces a quiet surrender. If timing is everything, then much of what we call skill, effort, or merit is subject to forces beyond our control. How much of success is not brilliance, but luck, the accidental alignment of mood, moment, and audience? The poet whose words are ignored in their lifetime, then revered a century later. The leader whose policies fail in crisis, but succeed in calm. If power depends on timing, then the wise must learn to bow to time itself. Yet within that surrender lies a deeper control. For while you cannot command the moment, you can prepare for it. You can refine your vision, sharpen your tools, deepen your understanding, so that when the wave finally rises, you are not scrambling to catch it. You are already riding it. Now, having mastered patience, what of desire? What when the wave never comes? When the thing you want remains out of reach, not by timing, but by impossibility? Do you fight? Do you suffer? Or do you turn your face away and pretend it was never worth wanting? Let us now consider the elegance of disdain, of making loss look like choice. There is a quiet degradation in unfulfilled desire, an invisible weight that settles into the bones when you want something deeply and are denied. To beg, to plead, to rage against the loss is human, but it is also surrender. The 36th law, disdain things you cannot have, ignoring them is the best revenge, offers a colder, sharper path, transform longing into contempt. When you are excluded, rejected, or passed over, do not show hunger. Show indifference. Do not argue that you deserved it. Act as if you never wanted it at all. For nothing unsettles the victor more than the loser who walks away without looking back. Anger can be dismissed. Tears can be forgotten. But cold, silent disdain? That lingers. It suggests not only that you were unimpressed, but that they were never impressive enough to matter. This is not denial. It is reframe. The mind clings to what it cannot have, inflating its value, turning absence into obsession. But power lies in reversing that impulse. If you cannot possess the prize, strip it of its worth. The promotion given to another? Speak of it as a burden, not a triumph. The lover who chose someone else? Let your life unfold with such quiet fullness that their absence seems irrelevant. The rival celebrated while you remain unseen? Do not compete. Withdraw. Let your silence speak louder than any protest. In doing so, you shift the narrative. You are no longer the one who lost, you are the one who refused to play. And in that refusal, you reclaim agency. History is filled with those who mastered this alchemy. The philosopher who, exiled from court, wrote as if politics were beneath him. The artist rejected by galleries who opened their own exhibition with a shrug, calling it a favor to the public. The executive passed over for CEO who left with grace, only to be begged back months later, not because they proved their worth, but because their absence made the throne look empty. Indifference is the ultimate power move because it cannot be countered. You cannot silence someone who says nothing. You cannot humiliate someone who refuses to react. But this law carries a quiet hollowness. For disdain is not the same as freedom. It is a performance of superiority, often built on the very pain it claims to transcend. To scorn what you cannot have is to armor the heart, yes, but armor also imprisons. If you disdain every loss, do you not risk becoming incapable of desire? Of vulnerability? Of love? The one who pretends nothing matters may eventually believe it. And in that belief, they may find safety, but not joy. Worse, the constant act of pretending to be above it all can become a prison of pride. You may win the battle of perception, but lose the capacity to want, to need, to be human. And yet, in the game of influence, perception is power. To be seen as untouchable is to become so. But what if silence and disdain are not enough? What if the world refuses to notice your absence, your quiet superiority? Then it is time to shift from shadow to light. Not with a plea, not with a protest, but with brilliance so bright it cannot be ignored. Let us now turn from quiet scorn to dazzling presence, to the art of spectacle. There is a deep truth buried in the rituals of power. People do not believe what they are told. They believe what they see. The 37th law, create compelling spectacles, speaks to the primacy of image over argument, of theater over truth. In a world saturated with words, endless speeches, explanations, promises, what cuts through the noise is not logic, but spectacle. A single unforgettable moment, carefully orchestrated, can shape perception for decades. The mind may forget a speech, but it remembers the king descending a golden staircase in silence. It forgets policy details, but recalls the activist setting fire to a uniform in the town square. It dismisses statistics, but never forgets the billionaire stepping out of a rocket. These are not accidents. They are performances designed to bypass reason and implant themselves directly into the imagination. Power, in its purest form, is not just exercised, it is witnessed. And to be witnessed is to be believed. A quiet victory in a backroom negotiation may change the world, but it changes nothing if no one sees it. But a symbolic act, a crown placed on a child's head, a flag burned, a building lit in a single color, these are language without words. They carry meaning that spreads faster than any explanation. They become legend. They are repeated not in documents, but in whispers, in images shared across screens, in stories retold long after the event. The spectacle is not a distraction from power. It is power made visible. This is the alchemy of influence, turning action into myth. The coronation is not about governance. It is about awe. The protest is not just about change. It is about visibility. The product launch is not about function. It is about desire. These moments are crafted not for utility, but for emotional resonance. They appeal not to the intellect, but to the subconscious, the part of the mind that remembers dreams, fears, and symbols. And because they are rare, dramatic, often shocking, they disrupt routine, force attention, and imprint themselves permanently. But this law forces a haunting question. If power lives in performance, then what is real? Are leaders not just decision makers, but actors playing roles written by history, expectation, and propaganda? Are we not all, in some way, participants in a vast, unending theater, where truth is shaped not by facts, but by what is staged, photographed, remembered? The general who wins a war is celebrated not for strategy, but for the image of him standing atop the captured fortress. The lover who wins affection not through kindness, but through a grand, public gesture. In such a world, authenticity becomes irrelevant. What matters is the show. And yet, without spectacle, even the most profound truth can vanish unnoticed. Ideas need vessels. Belief needs symbols. Justice needs witnesses. The quiet do not always inherit the earth, because no one sees them coming. So the wise do not shy from the stage. They understand that to be forgotten is to be powerless. And so they create moments that cannot be ignored, carefully, deliberately, with the precision of a painter choosing the final stroke. But even the most dazzling performance requires balance. For while the world watches the spectacle, the real work often happens in silence. Behind the curtain. In the mind. Where the rules are not broken, but quietly rewritten. Let us now consider the duality of existence. The mask worn in public, the truth held in private. Even as you conform, you can still conspire. There is a quiet split that forms in those who see the world clearly but must move through it pretending not to. The 38th law, think as you like, but behave like others, is the survival code of the mind in a conformist world. It acknowledges a fundamental truth: freedom of thought is possible even under the most oppressive systems, but freedom of expression is dangerous. You may believe in revolution while standing in line for the anthem. You may reject dogma while lighting the ritual candle. You may dream of upheaval while nodding in agreement at the meeting. The body performs obedience. The mind remains unchained. And in that duality, you survive long enough to act, to wait, to strike when the time is right. History is filled with those who mastered this double life. The philosopher who wrote subversive ideas in coded language, hiding rebellion behind classical references. The scientist who nodded along to doctrine while secretly testing forbidden theories. The employee who smiles at corporate slogans while drafting a plan to leave and expose the corruption. They do not announce their dissent. They wear the mask of compliance, not out of cowardice, but strategy. For to speak too soon is not courage, it is suicide. The world does not reward truth-tellers. It rewards those who live to tell the truth at the right moment. And that requires patience, disguise, the willingness to let falsehoods stand, temporarily, so that truth may one day rise. This law thrives in any system where deviation is punished: authoritarian regimes, rigid institutions, toxic workplaces, even families bound by unspoken rules. The one who questions too early is silenced, not because their idea is wrong, but because it threatens the illusion of harmony. But the one who waits, observes, conforms, learns the rules, gains something far more valuable than approval: access. They are trusted. They are overlooked. They are allowed to stay in the room when decisions are made. And from that position, they can gather strength, allies, knowledge, until the balance shifts, and the silent one becomes the one who changes everything. But this duality carries a slow erosion of the self. To live in two worlds is to risk losing both. The longer you wear the mask, the harder it becomes to remember what lies beneath. You begin to fear your own thoughts, not because they are dangerous, but because you've hidden them for so long. You flinch at your own honesty. You start to believe the performance. The revolutionary begins to enjoy the comfort of the system they hate. The truth seeker starts to prefer the safety of silence. And worse, when the moment finally comes to act, when the mask must fall, the world may no longer recognize you. Even your allies may distrust the sudden shift. The one who is so loyal, so quiet, so normal, how can they now claim to be different? Still, this law is not hypocrisy. It is preservation. It is the understanding that ideas are fragile, and idealism without strategy is just noise. To change the world, you must first be allowed to stay in it. So you conform, not forever, but until the time comes. Until the stage is set. Until the water is stirred. For clarity is not always strength. Sometimes, the deepest moves begin not with a declaration, but with a disturbance. Let us now consider the art of chaos. Of clouding the waters so you can catch what swims in the dark. There is a deceptive stillness in calm waters, a surface so smooth it hides what lies beneath. The 39th law, stir up waters to catch fish, teaches that clarity does not always come from peace, but from disruption. In order, people wear masks. They follow rules, suppress impulses, perform loyalty. But when the surface is disturbed, when conflict erupts, rumors spread, or uncertainty takes hold, those masks slip. The loyal reveal their hesitation. The strong expose their fear. The hidden alliances surface like shadows cast by sudden light. And in that moment of confusion, while others flail, the one who created the chaos remains still, watchful, ready. For disorder is not a breakdown of control, it can be its most refined expression. This is not random destruction. It is calculated turbulence. The wise do not wait for truth to emerge. They provoke it. A leader facing unseen opposition might leak a false plan, then watch who reacts with panic or anger. A partner uncertain of their lover's commitment might withdraw affection, not out of cruelty, but to see what response arises. A CEO navigating office politics might announce a sudden restructuring, not because it's needed, but to observe who scrambles to protect their power, who rushes to betray allies, who remains calm. In the ripple of disruption, true nature surfaces. People cannot maintain performance when the ground shifts. They act on instinct. And instinct does not lie. Chaos, in this sense, is a filter. It separates the performative from the real. The one who speaks of loyalty but abandons you in crisis. The friend who praises you in public but undermines you in private. The subordinate who nods in meetings but sabotages behind closed doors. When the waters are stirred, they reveal themselves, not through confession, but through reaction. And the one who orchestrated the disturbance? They do not panic. They have already mapped the currents. They move with precision, not because they caused the storm out of rage, but because they knew how to navigate it before it began. But this law carries a moral shadow. To create chaos is to harm, even if indirectly. Innocent people get caught in the turbulence. Trust erodes. Relationships fracture. And the one who thrives in disorder may begin to depend on it. If your power grows in the storm, do you have a secret interest in never restoring peace? The politician who fuels division to remain relevant. The partner whose drama to feel loved. The leader who creates crises so they can be the one to solve them. Over time, stability becomes threatening. For in calm waters, your advantage disappears. And worse, chaos, once unleashed, is not always controllable. The fish you hope to catch may escape. The waters may flood the shore. The disturbance may outlive your intent, spiraling beyond your reach. Yet still, in a world of deception, clarity is rare. And sometimes, the only way to see the truth is to shake the foundation. But what of gentler tactics? What of kindness, generosity, the unexpected gift? Are they acts of love, or subtle snares? Let us now consider the quiet danger of the free offering. Of the gift that asks nothing, but demands everything in return. There is a quiet gravity in receiving, a subtle shift that occurs the moment you accept something offered freely. The 40th law, despise the free lunch, does not deny the existence of generosity, but questions its cost. For in the economy of power, nothing is truly free. A meal, a favor, an unexpected gift, these are not merely kindnesses. They are transactions disguised as grace. The mind may not calculate the debt immediately, but it registers it. And sooner or later, balance demands restoration. The one who gives does not always demand repayment in words, but in loyalty, in silence, in future concessions. To accept a gift is to enter an invisible contract, one you never signed, but are expected to honor. Consider the colleague who suddenly brings you coffee every morning. No reason. No occasion. Just kindness. At first, it feels warm, affirming. But soon, you find yourself agreeing with their ideas in meetings, covering for them when they're late, hesitating to challenge them when they're wrong. Not because you owe them, but because a quiet guilt hums beneath your choices. You did not ask for the coffee, but you accepted it, and now, without a word, you are paying. Or the friend who pays for dinner, then months later asks for a favor that feels too large, too inconvenient. You hesitate, but the refusal sticks in your throat. After all, didn't they cover the bill? Didn't you say thank you with a smile? This is the trap of the free lunch. It makes obligation feel like gratitude. It embeds power and generosity, so that the giver becomes the one in control. They hold the memory of what they gave, and you, the unspoken duty to return it. The more you receive, the more you owe, not just in action, but in autonomy. Your choices begin to bend toward their expectations. You become cautious, not to offend the hand that fed you. And so, the wise do not despise generosity out of cynicism, but out of self-preservation. They understand that true independence means owing nothing. It is better to pay your share, to decline unsolicited gifts, to trade openly rather than receive blindly. When you pay, the exchange is complete. There is no lingering debt, no unspoken claim on your future. The transaction ends where it began. But when you accept a gift, the transaction has only just begun. Yet this law carries a quiet loneliness. To reject all free offerings is to build walls around yourself. It is to live in a world of strict accounting, where warmth is suspect, and kindness is seen as strategy. If we are always guarding against hidden debts, do we close ourselves to genuine connection? Can love, friendship, or compassion exist without exchange? Or are we all, at some level, bartering affection for security, loyalty for belonging? And if every gift carries a price, then perhaps the most dangerous debt is the one we never notice, the slow erosion of freedom masked as goodwill. But the weight of obligation is not the only danger in the world of power. Sometimes, the greatest risk is not what you accept, but who you follow. Not the gift, but the shadow of the giant. For to walk behind greatness is to risk being crushed by its footsteps. Let us now consider the peril of imitation, of stepping into a legacy too large to carry. There is a peculiar cruelty in legacy, one that does not diminish with time, but grows heavier the longer the predecessor is gone. The 41st law, avoid stepping into a great man's shoes, speaks to the invisible prison of comparison. When you follow a legend, a visionary leader, a revolutionary artist, a beloved ruler, you do not inherit their power. You inherit their shadow. And that shadow does not merely loom, it judges. Every decision you make is measured not against reality, but against myth. Did you show the same courage? The same brilliance? The same charisma? No matter how capable you are not seen as a successor. You are seen as a replacement. And replacements are never equal. They are always, by definition, secondary. The tragedy is not that you failed to match the greatness before you, but that you are now allowed to be different. The world does not want a new version. It wants a resurrection. The new CEO is not praised for modernizing the company, but criticized for lacking the founder's fire. The new actor playing a beloved role is not judged on their craft, but on whether they feel like the original. The child of a famous parent is not seen for their own work, but as a diminished echo. In trying to honor the past, you become trapped by it. You contort yourself to fit a mold that was never meant for you. And in doing so, you lose not only your chance to shine, but your very identity. History is littered with those who were destroyed by the shoes they inherited. Kings who ruled wisely but were overthrown because they weren't as bold as their fathers. Artists who developed new styles only to be dismissed as not like the old ones. Reformers who tried to continue a movement only to be crushed by the weight of nostalgia. The public does not mourn the past. It worships it. And worship leaves no room for the present. But this law does not demand that we reject the wisdom of those who came before. We are all shaped by the giants, learners of their lessons, inheritors of their breakthroughs. The danger is not in learning from them, but in becoming their imitation. True power does not come from filling a role, but from creating one that did not exist. The one who does not ask, how would they have done it, but what has never been done, they do not walk in the giant's footsteps. They walk beside them, on ground they cleared themselves. And in doing so, they escape comparison. Not because they are better, but because they are other. They cannot be measured by the same scale. They change the game before it begins. Yet this raises a deeper question. Can we ever truly escape the past? Even in rebellion, we define ourselves in relation to what came before. The innovator is only radical in contrast to tradition. The new king only gains meaning because the old one died. Perhaps the answer is not to deny the giant, but to stop walking behind them. To step not into their shoes, but onto your own ground. To build not a copy, but a new architecture, where your voice is not a response, but an origin. For power is not in continuation. It is an emergence. Now, when the path is clear and the legacy your own, how do you face opposition? Not by waging war on the crowd, not by exhausting yourself against the masses, but by striking at the source, by removing the voice that commands the chorus. Let us now consider the precision of power, the strategy of the single, decisive blow. There is a quiet truth in the behavior of crowds. They move not by collective will, but by direction. Like a flock of birds wheeling across the sky, they appear unified, instinctual, self-organized, but in truth, they follow. One leads, and the rest respond. The 42nd law, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter, reveals the fragile spine of any movement, organization, or uprising. Remove the central mind, the symbolic heart, the voice that gives shape to the chaos, and the rest lose their momentum. The protest falters. The company stalls. The revolution stumbles. Not because the cause was unjust, or the people weak, but because the force that turned intention into action has been severed. The shepherd does not merely guide, they embody. And when they are gone, the flock does not automatically appoint a successor. It hesitates. It fragments. It disperses. This is not a call for brutality, but an observation of structure. Power, even in its most democratic forms, often crystallizes around a single presence. The visionary who articulates the dream. The speaker who gives voice to the silence. The strategist who sees 3 steps ahead. Without them, the energy that once surged forward begins to swirl in place. The followers, so accustomed to being led, do not know how to lead themselves. They look to one another, waiting for someone to step forward, and when no one does, the spell breaks. The meeting is postponed. The campaign loses steam. The rebellion collapses into infighting, or worse, apathy. This is why tyrants guard their rivals so fiercely, why regimes silence dissenting voices before they become symbols, why assassinations have shaped the course of history far beyond the single life they ended. A bullet, a whisper, a prison cell, sometimes, that is all it takes to dissolve a movement that once seemed unstoppable. But this law carries a haunting uncertainty. For while the sheep may scatter, they do not always remain harmless. A flock without a shepherd does not simply vanish. It may drift into silence, or it may, in time, give rise to something far more dangerous. When the shepherd falls, the sheep do not always remain sheep. Some begin to think for themselves. Some grow teeth. Some remember that they, too, can lead. And when the next voice rises, it may not be a shepherd at all, but a wolf. The vacuum left by the fallen leader does not stay empty. It calls out for a new sender. And what fills it may be more radical, more ruthless, more unified by vengeance than what came before. Moreover, the strategy of decapitation assumes that power resides only at the top. But some movements are rhizomatic, rooted not in a single figure, but in shared belief. Remove one leader, and 10 rise in their place. The idea, once planted, cannot be killed by killing the planter. Tyrants have learned this too late, silencing one revolutionary only to find their words echoing in 1,000 new throats. And so, the wise do not rely on violence alone. They understand that while striking the shepherd may scatter the flock, it does not erase the hunger that brought them together. It does not kill the need for guidance, for meaning, for change. And in the silence that follows the fall, something new may stir. Not in the open, but in the shadows. Not through force, but through belief. For true conquest does not begin with a blade. It begins with a thought. Let us now consider the deeper war, the one fought not for bodies, but for minds. There is a boundary in every human being that force cannot cross, the inner sanctum where belief takes root, where desire is born, where identity forms. You can chain the body, silence the voice, occupy the land, but you cannot command the soul to obey unless it chooses to. The 43rd law, work on the hearts and minds of others, reveals that the most enduring power is not domination, but internalization. It is not enough to make someone do what you want. The true victory comes when they want to do it. When your will becomes their desire, your truth their conviction, your vision their dream. Then, they do not follow out of fear or obligation. They follow because not following would feel like betrayal, not of you, but of themselves. This is not coercion. It is conversion. The master does not issue commands. They reshape the landscape of perception. They redefine what is noble, what is shameful, what is possible. They do not say, you must obey. They make you believe that obedience is freedom. They do not demand loyalty. They make disloyalty feel like losing yourself. Like the teacher who reshapes a student's sense of worth, the leader who convinces a nation that sacrifice is glory, the lover who makes their partner believe that devotion is love, the ideology that teaches its followers that questioning is weakness. This is the quiet alchemy of influence. Over time, the mind begins to police itself. It no longer needs an overseer. It enforces its own beliefs with the ferocity of self-protection. This law operates in every realm where influence matters. In education, where values are woven into lessons. In advertising, where desire is manufactured as identity. In politics, where enemies are framed not as opponents, but as moral threats. In relationships, where one person slowly reshapes the other's sense of reality until their worldview aligns perfectly with their own. The most powerful systems are not those that punish disobedience, but those that make disobedience unthinkable. But this law carries a vertigo of self-doubt. If minds can be shaped so thoroughly, then how do we know our own thoughts are ours? The values you hold, the causes you champion, the truths you defend, were they chosen or implanted? The parent's voice in your head, the teacher's lesson, the slogan repeated until it feels like wisdom. Where does influence end and identity begin? And if we are all, to some degree, products of the minds that shaped us, then is autonomy an illusion? Worse, the one who masters this law often becomes blind to their own manipulation. The propagandist believes their own message. The reformer becomes dogmatic. The lover who reshapes their partner's mind may not see that they, too, are trapped in a script written by someone else long ago. And yet, this is the only power that lasts. Force decays. Fear fades. But belief endures. A conquered people who come to love their ruler will not rebel, even when the army is gone. A follower who believes in the cause will defend it long after the leader is dead. To control the body is temporary. To control the mind is legacy. But what if you do not wish to convert, only to destabilize? Not to win the heart, but to break the rhythm of the enemy? There is a subtler way to fight, one that requires no belief, no conversion, no grand vision. A way that turns their own energy against them. Let us now consider the silent sabotage of reflection. Of fighting not with force, but with mimicry. There is a quiet violence in being seen, especially when the reflection shows something you refuse to acknowledge in yourself. The 44th law, disarm and infuriate with the mirror effect, operates on a simple, devastating principle. The most effective way to defeat an aggressor is not to oppose them, but to reflect them. Not with words, but with action. Not with argument, but with imitation. When someone lies, you do not expose the lie, you tell one of your own, crafted to mirror theirs. When they shout, you speak louder, but with cold precision. When they manipulate, you manipulate back, just as skillfully, just as invisibly. You do not break the rules. You follow them so perfectly that the game reveals its own absurdity. And in that moment, the attacker sees not you, but themselves. And they cannot bear the sight. This is not retaliation. It is exposure. The bully who mocks your silence suddenly finds their jokes echoed back at them, stripped of humor, rendered grotesque. The colleague who takes credit for your ideas receives the same treatment, your voice calm, your tone polite, as you casually claim ownership of their work. The lover who withholds affection begins to experience the same silence, the same distance, the same longing, delivered not with drama, but with serene consistency. You do not accuse. You imitate. And in doing so, you force them to confront the ugliness of their own behavior, not as something done to you, but as something they willingly chose. Hypocrisy collapses under its own weight. The accuser becomes the accused simply by seeing their actions repeated without shame. And here lies the brilliance of the mirror. It denies the attacker their moral high ground. How can they rage at your aggression when they initiated it? How can they demand honesty when they began the deception? The mind recoils from cognitive dissonance. They cannot condemn you without condemning themselves. So instead, they escalate. They shout louder. They scheme deeper. They lose composure. And in that unraveling, they reveal their insecurity, their desperation, their lack of control. Meanwhile, you remain calm, unmoved. Not because you are indifferent, but because you are the still center of their storm. You are not reacting. You are reflecting. And in that stillness, you gain power, not by winning, but by not needing to. But this law carries a quiet corrosion. To mirror evil is not to remain untouched by it. Every lie repeated, every act of coldness performed, leaves a residue. How long can you wear the mask of the enemy before it begins to fit? To fight fire with fire is to risk becoming fire. The one who masters the mirror may find, over time, that they no longer need provocation to reflect cruelty. They begin to anticipate it, invite it, enjoy it. And worse, in a world where everyone mirrors, no one speaks from truth. Every gesture becomes tactical. Every word, a countermove. Where's the space for honesty, for vulnerability, for love that does not calculate its return? And yet, in the right hands, the mirror is not cruelty, it is justice. A way to reveal without accusing, to punish without violence, to win without blood. Now, having mastered the art of resistance and reflection, what of progress? Change is inevitable. But must it come all at once? Or can it be shaped slowly, patiently, like water carving stone? Let us now consider the wisdom of gradual transformation. There is a deep instinct in the human mind to resist disruption, not because people hate progress, but because they fear loss. The 45th law, preach the need to change, but never reform too much at once, speaks to the delicate art of transformation. Real change does not arrive in thunder, but in whispers. It does not storm the gates, it slips through the cracks, disguised as continuity. The most effective revolutionaries do not burn the old world. They renovate it. They speak of preservation even as they dismantle, of tradition even as they innovate. They understand that people will accept the future, so long as it feels like an extension of the past. Demand too much too quickly, and you awaken fear. Fear breeds resistance. Resistance becomes backlash. And even the noblest cause can be undone not by its flaws, but by its pace. This is the paradox of reform. The more urgently something is needed, the more slowly it must be introduced. A leader who abolishes an unjust system overnight may believe they are acting with courage, but they also strip people of the familiar, however flawed. The employee who overhauls a workflow in a single week may improve efficiency, but alienate the team. The partner who demands total honesty, total change, total healing in a single conversation may want intimacy, but provoke retreat. The mind cannot absorb radical transformation without first being prepared to receive it. It needs time to grieve the old, to trust the new, to reinterpret its values without feeling torn apart. So the wise reformer moves like a current beneath the surface. They introduce change not as revolution, but as refinement. They call the new system a modernization of the old. They frame the unfamiliar as a return to forgotten principles. They let people believe they have always believed in what is now being introduced. A politician does not say, "We will destroy the old order." They say, "We will restore what was lost." A therapist does not say, "You are wrong." They say, "What if there's another way that still honors who you are?" A marketer does not say, "Forget everything you know." They say, "Imagine if it worked even better." The idea is not to deceive, but to ease the mind across the threshold of change without triggering its defenses. But this law carries a quiet compromise. When change is slowed, diluted, softened, does it ever truly arrive? The reformer who waits for the perfect moment may wait forever. The leader who fears backlash may never act at all. And in the name of patience, injustice persists. Tradition becomes a shield for stagnation. The world moves forward in appearance, but in truth, only the surface has shifted. The deeper structures remain. And yet, history shows that the most lasting changes were not the most dramatic, but the most gradual, the ones that rewired belief without triggering revolt. The radical becomes normal not through force, but through familiarity. So the question is not whether to change, but how to make change survivable. For power is not in the bold leap, but in the imperceptible shift. The hand that moves too fast is slapped away. The hand that moves slowly is not seen at all until the door is already open. Now, having risen through patience, through strategy, through unseen transformation, beware the peak. Beware the moment you are seen not as human, but as flawless. For perfection does not inspire admiration alone. It inspires envy. And envy, in silence, sharpens knives. Let us now consider the danger of seeming too good to be true. There is a quiet hostility in perfection, an unease that gathers in the air when someone seems too polished, too capable, too unshakable. The 46th law, never appear too perfect, speaks to a fundamental truth of human nature. We do not trust the flawless. We fear them. We resent them. And in our discomfort, we seek cracks, invent flaws, or create them if they do not exist. Perfection feels unnatural, even inhuman. It suggests superiority not earned through struggle, but granted by fate, or worse, concealed manipulation. But a single, visible imperfection, a stammer in speech, a moment of forgetfulness, a small indulgence in vice, acts like a release valve. It signals, asterisk, I am not above you. I am like you, asterisk, and in that instant, envy softens into empathy. Suspicion gives way to loyalty. People do not defend the untouchable. They defend the one who stumbles, who blushes, who laughs at their own mistake, because they believe that person deserves protection. This is not weakness. It is wisdom. The leader who admits a minor error in public does not lose authority, they gain credibility. The celebrity who shares a humiliating childhood story becomes beloved, not despite their flaw, but because of it. The executive who confesses they once failed a project does not diminish their success, they make it feel attainable. These are not accidents. They are calculated glimpses behind the curtain, carefully chosen vulnerabilities that humanize power without undermining it. The flaw must be real enough to be believed, but trivial enough not to matter. It is not a confession of incompetence, but a gesture of inclusion. I have what you want, but I am still one of you, and in that illusion of kingship, people will forgive your triumphs, your influence, even your occasional cruelty. But this law walks a razor's edge between authenticity and manipulation. For when vulnerability is performed, it ceases to be vulnerability. The tear shed at the right moment. The accidental admission of doubt. The flaw that always seems to appear when loyalty is wavering. If we all begin to stage our weaknesses, then no gesture of humility can be trusted. The world becomes a theater of feigned fragility, where everyone is pretending to be broken so they can be loved. And in that performance, true connection dies. Because if no one is ever truly open, then no one is ever truly seen. Worse, the habit of pretending to be less than you are can erode self-perception. How long can you play the fallible one before you begin to believe it? How often can you downplay your strength before you forget its weight? The one who constantly apologizes for their success may one day stop believing in it altogether. And yet, in the game of influence, relatability is often more powerful than brilliance. People do not follow gods. They follow heroes, those who rise, but still bear the marks of the climb. So the wise do not hide their power. They simply let it cast a shadow, one that makes room for others to stand beside them. They are strong, but not invincible. Capable, but not flawless. And in that delicate balance, they become not only powerful, but protected. For the perfect are admired from a distance. The imperfect are defended at all costs. Now, having mastered the art of image, of flaw, of control, what if the final act of power is not to be strong, not to be wise, not to be admired, but to be ungraspable, not to have a form at all? Let us now dissolve into the final law, into fluidity, into formlessness. There is a moment in every victory that goes unnoticed, the precise point where triumph ends and overreach begins. The 47th law, do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, know when to stop, teaches that the true measure of power is not in winning, but in knowing when to cease. For victory, like fire, must be contained. Left unchecked, it consumes not only the enemy, but the victor. The general who defeats his rival and then executes their family does not secure peace, he seeds rebellion. The negotiator who wins every concession does not demonstrate strength, they provoke desperation. The lover who triumphs in an argument and continues to speak, to twist the knife of logic, does not prove they are right, they destroy the relationship. Winning is an act. Wisdom is knowing when to put the sword back in its sheath. History is littered with those who did not stop. Empires that expanded until their borders could no longer be held. Leaders who, after toppling a tyrant, became worse in their hunger for control. Revolutions that began in justice and ended in terror because the thirst for change turned into a hunger for vengeance. The mind, intoxicated by success, begins to believe its own invincibility. If I won this much, it whispers, why not more? But each additional demand, each extra humiliation, each refusal to allow the defeated a shred of dignity, multiplies resentment. The vanquished do not disappear. They wait. They remember. And when the victor grows complacent, believing the war is over, the ghosts return, not as an army, but as a whisper, a conspiracy, a single spark in the dark. The wise, however, understand that power is not proven by how much you take, but by how much you choose not to take. They leave the defeated a thread of honor. They allow them to walk away with their dignity intact. They do not demand total submission, because total submission breeds total hatred. Instead, they offer a path to reconciliation, not out of mercy, but strategy. A humiliated enemy is dangerous. A respected one may become an ally. The one who knows when to stop does not leave behind broken men, but men who owe them something, the gift of survival, of face, of future. And that debt, quietly held, is often more binding than fear. But this law runs counter to the culture of excess. In a world that glorifies going all the way, that rewards the one who takes the last slice, the final word, the ultimate prize, restraint can look like weakness. To step back is seen as hesitation. To leave something on the table is interpreted as failure to dominate. And so, many push forward, blind to the gathering storm. They do not see the allies turning silent, the smiles becoming stiff, the loyalty beginning to crack. And yet, the greatest power is often invisible, the kind that does not need to prove itself by taking everything. It is enough to win. It is enough to stand. For empires are not destroyed by enemies. They are undone by their own hunger. So the master of power does not fall because they were defeated. They fall because they forgot how to stop. Now, having conquered, having retreated, having balanced strength with wisdom, what remains? Not the crown, not the victory, but the one thing no one can capture, because it has no shape at all. Let us now dissolve into the final law, into fluidity, into formlessness. There is a final, quiet liberation in becoming nothing. The 48th and final law, assume formlessness, is not a strategy among others. It is the dissolution of strategy itself. It stands as the culmination of all that came before, the ultimate defense not of strength, but of absence. For the moment you are defined, labeled as kind, as ruthless, as loyal, as cunning, you become predictable. And the predictable can be anticipated, countered, used. The world seeks to name you, to box you, to understand you, not out of curiosity, but to control you. Once they believe they know who you are, they stop watching. They assume. They plan. And in that assumption, you are no longer free. But if you have no fixed shape, no consistent pattern, no identity to defend, then you cannot be pinned down. You slip through expectations like water through fingers. To be formless is not to be empty, but to be infinite in possibility. Like water, you take the shape of whatever vessel holds you, calm in stillness, forceful in motion, invisible when evaporated. When attacked, you do not resist, you yield, and in yielding, you redirect the force of the blowback upon itself. When trapped, you do not break, you flow around the obstacle, finding a new path without conflict. You are not loyal, not treacherous, not kind, not cruel, not predictable, not chaotic. You are none of these things, because you are all of them when needed. You speak truth when lies would protect you, and lie when honesty would expose you. You appear weak when strength would make you a target, and strong when weakness would invite attack. You are not inconsistent, you are free. This is the highest form of power, not to dominate, but to evade capture entirely. The rigid tree snaps in a storm. The reed bends and survives. The labeled mind is manipulated by appeals to its known values. The formless one cannot be seduced by flattery, trapped by guilt, or provoked by insult, because they do not claim any fixed virtue or vice. They are not someone. They are what is needed. But this law carries a profound paradox. To have no identity is to be free, but is freedom the same as being? If you are nothing, do you exist? Or do you become a mirror, reflecting only what others need to see? In shedding the self to avoid control, do you lose the self entirely? And if no one can grasp you, can anyone truly know you, not as a threat, not as a tool, but as a person? And yet, in a world obsessed with image, with branding, with defining and being defined, to refuse form is the ultimate rebellion. Not because it makes you invincible, but because it makes you unexploitable. You cannot be used if you cannot be known. You cannot be defeated if you are never where they expect you to be. So the final truth is not a conquest, but a release. Not a crown, but a disappearance. 48 laws. 48 mirrors. Some reflect brilliance. Some darkness. But all reveal one truth: power is not out there. It is in the silence between words. In the pause before action. In the thought you just had, and the one you didn't. You have walked through the labyrinth. Now, let it fade. Let the mind rest. Let the breath slow. You are not your thoughts. You are not your fears. You are not even the one who seeks power. You are the space in which it all appears and disappears. Breathe in. Breathe out. Sleep well.